Okay, please begin.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start our monthly meeting for the LA County Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. I want to welcome all the attendees. And I think the first thing we need to do is call the roll.
Yes, Commissioner Bonner, Commissioner Harris, Commissioner Giggins,
Here.
Chair Kennedy,
Here.
Commissioner Hicks,
Present.
Commissioner Rubin,
Present as well.
and I believe that is.
I don't know if we need to cover any logistics. Ingrid, we often talk about that, or just move forward with the approval of the consent calendar.
We can go ahead and just move forward, Chuck.
Okay, we're gonna just dive in. And so I think the first thing we have to do is approve our minutes from our last meeting on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2022.
I move to approve the minute.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, I think that's all we need to do then. The prior meeting minutes are approved, and we will go into our more substantive parts of today's meeting, and that's agenda item 2, reports and possible action. It begins with the chair's report, and although it feels uncomfortable to be giving this, I guess that's me. So I wanted to bring up a topic that I think is very important to really all the commissioners and definitely our community, and that is the commission's decision to conduct a independent investigation of deputy gangs. That's obviously something that our ad hoc committee chair, Lael Rubin, is going to talk about later. But the topic is on all of our minds, and I just wanted to bring up something for the commission to think about, and as well as for the community. On April 15th, 2021, this commission approved a draft anti-click policy, and that's what it was called. Obviously, it refers to deputy gangs or deputy cliques, and the commission unanimously recommended that Sheriff Villanueva pass a policy making it misconduct to even join a deputy gang. And in the past, he said that he has to have evidence of criminal misconduct, but this commission decided that the best way to tackle the problem would be to make membership in a deputy gang cause for misconduct and discipline. And everyone agreed with that. We had a preamble that explained why the policy was necessary and why the sheriff's current policy had been ineffective, primarily that no one has ever been disciplined under the current policy, which has been in existence since February 2020. And the next month, on May 20th, 2021, the sheriff actually appeared before this body virtually and declined to pass the policy, stating that he felt it violated his deputies' First Amendment right to association and due process. And he cited a 2014 opinion from the county council that said that he said prohibited him from adopting our policy. Our chair, Lael Rubin, ask whether or not he would be open to any fresh input from the county council about the constitutionality of the COC's proposed policy. And he said that he would welcome that. And since that time in 2021, the county council has issued a new legal opinion saying that he can implement the COC policy without any First Amendment problems. And despite that, he has not done so. So it's a full year since this commission has proposed that the LASD adopt our anti-click policy, and they have not. And it begs the question, what we should do next. I don't know, Lil, maybe it's more appropriate to discuss this when you give an update on deputy gangs, but I wanted to raise the issue because we have gone a year without any adoption of our proposed policy, and the reasons for not doing so no longer exist. And so this commission, I think, needs to act in some way, and that's my report. I think I'll hand it off to further elaborate when Commissioner Rubin reports on deputy gangs. But our next report on the agenda is our executive director's report. So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and good morning, members of the commission and folks who are in the audience listening. I did want to point out before we go, okay, we do have a quorum now with Mr. Bonner, so happy to see Mr. Bonner, who has joined us this morning. Want to give just a quick update on a couple of items. One, as I have reported on before, we are continuing in our commissioner recruitment. We hope to see the end of that process within the next 30 days or so. We're working with the board offices on getting 2 new commissioners appointed so that by our June commission, hoping to have at least 8 of 9, if not all 9 commissioners appointed to the commission. We'll have a full commission at that point. Over the past month and a half or so, we have had a budget ad hoc committee that has been looking at the CEO's budget for the Sheriff's Department. We've taken quite a bit of testimony from members of the public. The staff has done quite a bit of work on that budget as well. Because of the timing of our meeting and our inability to have a special meeting, we do have this information, and I'm hoping, absent some objection from the commission, that we'll be able to send our staff report, which was sent to you at our last meeting or meeting before, with a cover letter to the members of the board and to the CEO, which would indicate sort of the priorities that the public has talked about in terms of what the budget should look like, as well as sort of some of the commission priorities as well. So I can put a draft together, share it with the chair, because we won't have time to have a full commission meeting on it. I would just ask for permission, or absent any objection, to be able to send such an item over to the Board of Supervisors. Today on our agenda, we're talking about in custody deaths, and there have been quite a few. You'll hear from various people from the OIG's office, from the Sheriff's office, and from other entities as well. One of the things that we've talked about and I've discussed with the board offices is the possibility of establishing sort of a joint committee between the COC and the Civil Brand Commission, of course, having some assistance from the OIG as well, to really take some time to take a look at these deaths that are occurring in custody. I'll bring more information to you about that in the upcoming weeks, but I wanted to just put that on your plate so you can think about that for a bit. And the final item I just wanted to mention to everyone, I sent a notice out to you all that we have a staffing change on our staff. Our good friend and member of our staff, Frederick Chung, who I think is logged into our meeting this morning, has left our staff. He's gone on to do bigger and greater things, but I just wanted to publicly thank him for the fine job that he did, that we had him for the couple of years. He's a fantastic person, and I would not be surprised that one day in the future we'll be calling him member of Board of the Supervisors in about 10 years or so. So thank you, Frederick, for your service to our commission and to the people. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, Commissioner Rubin.
Yes, I'd like to ask Brian a question Since we did not have a special meeting on the budget, do we have sufficient public input, community input on the staff's recommendations for us to consider that further?
I think we do. We had a survey that was public for, I think, about 30 days. We did take public testimony at various meetings throughout this year as well. And I think we have sufficient information, as well as from, we received some written communication from members of the community as well. I think we have sufficient information to put together a summary of where the community wants the budget to go.
Well, I just want to add that JP and I actually did a town hall on the budget where we got a bunch of input from the community and stakeholders as well. Anything else?
Yeah, I had a question of the executive director, if I could, Sean.
Yes.
Excuse me. I think that's my dog there, but barking. But the staff report on the budget, was the proposal here to allow the chair to simply finalize on it and forward it then once the chair approves it to in other words, empower the chair to essentially approve what's transmitted to the Board of Supervisors? I just want to understand what the process is here.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so if I had some tweaks, I could communicate those to Chair Kennedy.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
So staff will put together the letter for the chair's signature, and then the chair will approve it. And of course, we'll get some input from commission members if necessary.
Just wanted to make sure that the commissioners would have an opportunity to review it at an appropriate time. That's fine. That process is fine with me. Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda is any report by our Inspector General, Max Huntsman. Max, would you like to make any remarks as we begin our meeting?
Yes. As you know, tomorrow the sheriff is supposed to appear to give testimony regarding law enforcement gangs in LASD, and he filed a writ with the federal court, and as reported in the paper, it was summarily denied. So we anticipate him coming tomorrow. That will be, we've gotten inquiries from the media. It will be a private process, not public, because it's part of an active investigation, and because we will be seeking confidential information. We don't know what questions he will answer or not answer, or where we'll be in the litigation, but that's will be a process that's ongoing, just so you know that we're continuing with that. We're also assisting Mr. Deixler upon request with his investigations. They've already produced very valuable information that we didn't have previously. So thank you to Mr. Deixler, and thank you to the Civilian Oversight Commission for beginning that process, which I share your concerns. Chair Kennedy expressed earlier regarding the sheriff's refusal to implement the policy you recommended. I would add to it that, in fact, the opinion that was written for him many, many years ago by county council was not as described by him. It's attorney-client privilege, so we can't go into the details, but I will say that it did not prevent him from passing the policy that this board suggested to begin with. So it's not as though county council had one opinion and then they changed it recently. That's not what happened. In any event, we're now in the process of conducting that investigation. So I really appreciate the board, the Civilian Oversight Commission working on that, and I'm happy to be starting the hard work of actually investigating, which has begun. The only other, budget-wise, you've discussed the budget. I will say we have some serious budget problems, as I think you all know, regarding your own staffing. We in OIG have the same problem. The board authorized 8 positions for us for probation oversight, and we agreed to conduct that oversight. And then the CEO gave us 4. So we already started out behind the 8 ball on that process. And recently, the Sheriff's Department has said that they believe they're in compliance with the Prison Rape Elimination Act in their station jails. Of course, station jails are where the assault or alleged assault on Mr. Escalante took place. There was a new case filed on that just recently, which you can read about in the paper as well. So we'll see. But in any event, we have to field auditors in order to, under the federal law, an inspector general's office can audit that process. Somebody has to for PREA compliance. And so we have asked in the past the CEO's office for positions, haven't received them. So I'm conducting emergency meetings with the CEO's office and the executive office to try to fund appropriately an auditing team. We already have people trained, so we have staff prepared to do it, but there's only so many hours in a day, so we need appropriate staff. And then, as you all know, we're working on law enforcement gangs now more actively, and we need appropriate staffing for that. So we have some serious staffing problems. Not your business, but we've had serious problems in probation having to do with the mandated closing of facilities from the state. They haven't mandated, they closed them. They found them out of compliance, and the probation department actually closed one of their facilities in the middle of the night almost, and we're trying to investigate that. So we're really behind the 8 ball. Having said all that, we will fully support Mr. Dykesler and his efforts, and we will investigate thoroughly as allowed to by law deputy gangs. So that will be the last thing that we don't handle. As to my reports that we've issued recently, we have 2 new ones. One is body worn camera report. If you care to look at it, you'll see that the most interesting part of it is an analysis of a particular incident involving Operation Safe Streets. Those are gang enforcement deputies, and the failure to use body cameras in those operations, which, as we warned, and as this commission, I think, warned, the policy the Sheriff's Department has on body cameras is ambiguous, does not result in consistent use of body cameras we're seeing in deputy-involved shootings, such as in this instance, and that continues to be a problem. So we continue to report on it. We still don't have access to the body-worn camera footage. I'm hoping to have a legal solution to that in the near future. And then our second report that has come out recently is a particular review of a shooting in which a deputy obtained an assault rifle from a sheriff's vehicle and fired at an unarmed people in a car that was not moving, or at least appeared not to be moving. It was close to not moving, certainly not threatening him in any way. And that's the subject of a prosecution at the district attorney's office. But the sheriff's department also, I believe, took disciplinary action on that person. I don't want to go into the details because some of that is protected. But as you'll see in the report, we talk about the process. What's deeply disturbing about that is, as we pointed out for years, the sheriff's department separates out its investigations and it waits for a criminal case. The impact of that was they fired, they took the disciplinary action without conducting an internal investigation. They had some information from the criminal investigation. They were legally entitled to conduct an internal investigation. They have an agreement with the union that they won't compel a statement while there's a pending criminal case, which I believe is an inappropriate agreement that they need to fix. But in any event, they could have conducted an investigation. They didn't. Instead, they just took action. And that's dangerous. Even if you have a video and you think you know what happened on the video, it's really essential to get all the details. So we've reported on that, on that that's, again, a bad practice. We have gotten no response from the department other than that they said, oh, we conducted an investigation, when they didn't. So that's where we stand, and that's the extent of my report. Ms. Belts will be talking about conditions of confinement a little later. The one thing I would just add, because I don't think she's addressing this. I think she's talking primarily about deaths, but maybe she'll talk about this a little bit. The Inmate Reception Center has continued to be have horrible conditions in it. We recently, staff went there and found the longest wait, I think, was pushing 30 hours. And we're talking about including people who are mentally ill and others who need to be provided permanent housing in appropriate circumstances. And the conditions they are confined in the Inmate Reception Center are intended to be maintained for a few hours, not for days. And so it continues to be the same problem that I've reported on repeatedly publicly. Recently, we had the federal monitors in the Rosas case issued a very, very serious report about the lack of progress in the Sheriff's Department in the last couple of years. And I think it was well taken, and it's consistent with our observations. And with that, I will answer any questions anybody has.
Do any commissioners have questions for our Inspector General? I don't see any. Max, I'm concerned you mentioned Operation Safe Streets and cameras. Could you just highlight what the problem is there. It's of concern because, of course, the OSS is connected with the Jump Out Boys deputy gang. I think they actually have OSS on the tattoo.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects. One is obviously OSS is a group that should have body cameras when they conduct operations in the field. As you point out, we have a history there regarding potential law enforcement gangs and the need to investigate that, of course, but we also need to protect the public, have body camera footage so that we can answer the question, what's being done? And is the conduct that, as you pointed out, the sheriff claims his policy is in conformity with state law, which it is not, because state law says participation in such a group, a law enforcement gang, is in and of itself a violation of policy and can be a fireable offense, can even cause you to have your right to be a peace officer removed. But he says you have to have additional conduct. Well, if that's the case, then you need to have body cameras on people, so you see if indeed there's additional conduct. So that's a simple, easy question. Complicating it is that the OSS in this case was operating in a task force format with another agency, and so the excuse given for why body cameras weren't employed was, well, we need a policy that's approved at federal government levels and whatnot, and so there's red tape that gets tossed in. I think it has to do with the ambiguity of the policy, but the Sheriff's Department has represented that they are going to work through that red tape and deploy the body-worn cameras. And so hopefully we'll get a more positive result in the future and a little more protection for the public.
Patty, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Max, I have a process question regarding the private interview with the sheriff tomorrow. What is the process for that? What happens afterwards? I know that it's going to be recorded. What happens then after that?
That depends on what happens during. We will question the sheriff regarding law enforcement gangs. He has hired additional lawyers, and I don't know how that's going to go, how many lawyers he will have present, how much cooperation we will get. If he answers all the questions, then we will have a set of responses, which we will then evaluate and use in our ongoing investigation. And ultimately, we will use that in our trying to assess which groups are law enforcement gangs and which aren't, which deputies are participating and which aren't, so that ultimately we can present a body of evidence to this commission for determination, both in terms of the policy. I think, as you've discussed, you have already a recommendation on policy, but ultimately I'm hoping this body will make a recommendation as to whether or not the current policy complies with state law, and as well as, I think, what the primary goal is in your investigation to evaluate the existence and significance of law enforcement gangs in LASD. So it will be available for your purposes. Either we present it, or we'll figure that out based on legal parameters, but also we want to have it available so that we can provide it and other evidence we collect as Brady material. As you know, there was a Brady list once upon a time, and the sheriff has said there's no Brady list anymore. So it's important that there be a Brady list when appropriate, and then also so that information of misconduct is available to criminal defendants. And now with the change in state law, it needs to be available to the post commission up in Sacramento, having to do with peace officer certification, because now peace officers can be decertified, including the sheriff, if they participate in law enforcement gangs or if they don't cooperate in an investigation. And we're having an investigation now, and so the eyes of the world are upon the sheriff's department as to their cooperation or lack thereof in that investigation. So the evidence integrity of that will be maintained, and then we'll also work with this commission to make sure that you can accomplish your goals and make it available as necessary for that, and we'll move from there. But that's assuming that the sheriff answers the questions. I'll believe it when I see it. We may have to go back to court and litigate more in terms of the details. I've already gotten an indicator from the representatives for the sheriff that he may not just answer the questions. So we'll see. I guess that's the bottom line, is we'll see.
Okay, thank you.
Leo.
Yes, one additional question for you, Max, and that is, has the sheriff requested a list of your questions in advance, as he sometimes has in the past when he has appeared before this commission? And if he has, have you provided any questions in advance?
He has not requested the questions in advance. He did request through his new lawyers copies of all evidence that we would be placing in front of him. We declined to do that. As you know, in an investigation, it's appropriate to have the flexibility to ask questions that the witness doesn't necessarily expect. So you can get a more candid response that tells you whether or not they're being truthful and thorough in their answers. So that's, we would not have given him the questions in advance, and we would not have given him the evidence in advance. But because of the limitations on the process, and because the sheriff has twice had to be ordered to comply with the subpoena process, I fully anticipate he's going to learn some of the questions in advance. He may hear them and then not answer them and then go to court and litigate whether or not he gets them. So before it's all done, he may get them in advance. But currently, they didn't ask for the questions, and we have not provided.
Thank you for that.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Max. We appreciate it, and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, Dara Williams, my chief deputy, will be conducting the examination, not me. But so send her luck through the ether.
I will. And so we're going to move on to our ad hoc committee updates and any other commissioner comments. I'd like to start, though, kind of consistent with the way the meeting has gone, with Lael Rubin giving us an update on the ad hoc committee on deputy cliques or gangs. As many of us know, last September, the Board of Supervisors directed this commission to review the RAND study and all the other reports out there, whether it be, the Colts report, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights report, the Citizens Commission on Jail Violence, the many reports of the Inspector General, as well as Loyola Law School's report, and to make recommendations related to deputy gangs about how to eradicate this longstanding problem from the department. And they really would like specific recommendations from us about how to move forward. And so Lael's going to give us an update on the activities of the ad hoc committee in that regard. And most importantly, she's going to introduce our new pro bono special counsel, Bert Deixler. So Lael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sean. As you've indicated, and as the reports so far, the ad hoc committee on deputy gangs has been very busy. Numerous meetings, and obviously welcoming Bert Deixler, our pro bono special counsel. And before I go into some of the issues that the ad hoc committee has been focusing on, I know Bert is here, and I'd like to introduce him and ask him to address the commission and the public briefly as to how he is proceeding. So Bert, if you'd like to take this time to offer some remarks, we would welcome that.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubin, and thank you to all the commissioners for the opportunity. I would address my remarks in three categories, which I would describe as the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let me start with the good. The good is we've got 7 law firms acting as a pro bono team, having assigned 18 lawyers to the project. It's a group of lawyers who are racially, ethnically, and gender diverse, more women than men. It consists of 8 former federal prosecutors, 2 former federal defenders, and 2 former members of the Los Angeles Police Commission. We've interviewed to date 20 people, and we have focused upon 4 cliques or subgroups to assist in a determination of whether the activity of the group falls within the penal code definition in 13670 for a deputy gang. Based upon what we've already determined, it is apparent that among at least 4 of these groups that we've investigated, that all are male and gender exclusionary, that they are ethnically exclusionary, with a particular Latino gang focused not only on the need for a Latino background, but one must be of Mexican heritage, not Central American heritage, to join. And we have found evidence of a pattern of behavior that violates fundamental principles of professional policing, and have witnesses who will so testify. And thus far, therefore, our investigation causes us to believe that these will constitute deputy gangs under the definition of the penal code. We have more interviews to come this coming week. And one of the things that is true, I often describe the famous journalist David Halberstam's instruction to young journalists about the question to always ask, which is, who else should we speak to? And that is the practice we've been following. And to a very large extent, people will name names. I'll talk about that a bit when I get to the ugly section of my presentation. We are, however, going to proceed with these interviews. We are going to use our Measure R subpoena power. We're going to try to have an expedited basis for the issuance of those subpoenas through the approaching the chair to establish some kind of expeditious procedure so that we can move this along. We understand its significance. One other or two other aspects of the good portion of this presentation, I would say, is the willingness and cooperation of Inspector General Huntsman and his team, who have been as open as they can be, consistent with their legal obligations, and Executive Director Williams, who has been more than willing to navigate us through some of the rockier shoals as we deal with some of the issues that are addressed. Briefly, I'd like to turn to what I would describe as the bad, without going into much detail. I've been disappointed, and I think the investigation has been materially hindered by what I'll describe as the slow reaction of the County Council to our requests for assistance in obtaining information, which should be readily available to them. It is unclear what the chain of authority is. Often we find having conversations and believing we've reached a modus vivendi, only to be told later that it has to be worked up through the chain. And so whatever we thought had been agreed turns out only to have been an indication of a possibility. So that has been made this slower and more difficult. I remain optimistic because I believe that we're dealing with people in good faith who are talented and committed to the cause, that will build some momentum and be able to get the information that we've requested, with more than all deliberate speed. I didn't want to end without addressing one of the ugly portions that we have found, and it may affect what we can do publicly, at least possibly. We have repeatedly been told in our private interviews by witnesses of their fear of retaliation by the sheriff were they to speak publicly. While it doesn't make it a definitive reason to not testify, and as I say, we have subpoena power under Measure R, it does introduce an element of complexity that probably shapes all of the work that this commission is charged with performing. And then the second and perhaps even uglier notion of this is we have had people tell us that they fear retaliation, physical attack from their peer group. Imagine working in an environment in which if it were known that you were speaking truth to power, that you would fear that, for example, the wheels on your car would be loosened and other similar kinds of expressions of concern. And so that too acts as a hindrance and an obstacle to what we can do. It is certainly a human reaction and one that we're trying to be mindful of while coaxing people to be more forthcoming. With that overview, I'd be delighted to respond to any questions anybody wishes to put to me.
Thank you very much for that, Bert. You certainly have been busy. I have a couple of questions and comments at this point in time. You've indicated that there are 7 law firms who are working with you. Can you identify who they are so that the public is aware of that? Number one, and then I'll respond. I have a couple of additional questions for you as well.
Sure. The law firms are my own, Kendall Brill, the Manat firm, the Covington firm, the Bird Morella firm, and the Proskauer firm. And working through the auspices of Loyola Law School and working with us collaboratively is the Munger Tolles law firm and the Winston and Strawn law firm.
Okay, thank you for that. And also to clarify so that the public is aware, you as pro bono special counsel do not have independent subpoena power. Your request for subpoenas and your needing subpoenas will come through this commission, correct?
Yes, 100% correct.
And also, do you have any future projection as to when you and your team might be able to hopefully present some testimony to this commission so that the public hears from the actual witnesses?
Yes, subject to the witnesses' availability, I would expect that at your next meeting, we'll be in a position to put on at least 2 witnesses.
We would certainly welcome that. And at least finally, at this point in time, you've indicated concerns about the speed with which County Council is moving on various issues and requests you've made. As you know, this ad hoc committee and certainly our chair and the executive director have worked to ameliorate some of those issues for you with County Council, and we will continue to do so. So it's unfortunate, considering the speed and the efficiency with which your team has moved, that you seem to be slowing down a bit, but we will do all we can to make sure that that moves along and that we are all working toward the same end. So with that, Sean, if you want to see if other commissioners have questions for Mr. Deichler.
Sure. It looks like, thank you, Lil. It looks like Rob has a question.
And a proposed motion, but the comment would be, I know there's been a reference here to the Board of Supervisors asking the Civilian Oversight Committee for recommendations on how to eliminate deputy cliques, gangs, or exclusionary subgroups. And that's something we've made recommendations on in the past. You pointed that out, Sean, earlier, and we can make further recommendations. But I want to make the point that the investigation that's being led by Mr. Deichler and pro bono counsel on behalf of the commission is in connection with an independent investigation of deputy cliques, gangs, and exclusionary subgroups by the Civilian Oversight Commission. And that investigation was authorized by a motion that was unanimously adopted by this commission on November 18th, 2021, which authorized the chair and the vice chair to proceed immediately and promptly forthwith to put together a team of pro bono counsel to conduct the independent investigation using the subpoena power of the Civilian Oversight Commission, including its independent subpoena power under Measure R. So I just want to make that point clear. That's number one. Number two, Mr. Deichler, in discussing what one of the objectives of the independent investigation is, described whether or not the deputy cliques, gangs, or subgroups that exist violate state laws. That is, whether they're deputy gangs within the meaning of state law. And that's certainly part of the investigation that was authorized and approved by the Oversight Commission. But it goes beyond that, Mr. Deichler. I just want you to understand that, and I think you do, that this investigation, first of all, is to determine whether deputy cliques, gangs, or exclusionary subgroups exist within the Sheriff's Department, where they exist, which stations they are operating at, the approximate number of members of those deputy cliques, their makeup, their impact on the Sheriff's Department and on the community. And when I say impact on the Sheriff's Department, I'm including the fact that they exclude other persons from, they're like private clubs operating within the Sheriff's Department. They're exclusionary practices. The fact that they undermine the chain of command within the Sheriff's Department, which makes it difficult for an organization, a law enforcement organization such as the Sheriff's Department. Is that occurring right now? Are there shot callers that are essentially deciding, that are part of the deputy cliques or gangs that are deciding who gets assigned where? That would badly undermine both the chain of command and morale within the department. And what are their impacts in terms of the use of unnecessary and excessive force within the community? So there are a whole bunch of issues here, and I just wanted to lay them on the table right now because I want the public to know what's being investigated here and why we're investigating it, because there have been many investigations that have shown that there have been deputy cliques and gang that operate with gang-like behavior. That goes back several decades. We want to know what currently the situation is. And that's why we're so gratified that so many law firms in our community and so many attorneys have come forward and volunteered to assist the Civilian Oversight Commission and Loyola Law School in conducting this investigation and answering these questions clearly, and then making the appropriate recommendations for the benefit of the Sheriff's Department, the county, and our community. Now, having said that, I have one other thing that I want to put on the table, and that is I'm very concerned with what Mr. Deichler had to say about, by the way, not surprised, but concerned about the potential intimidation of witnesses, because we want as many people to come forward and be interviewed by pro bono counsel as part of its investigation on behalf of the commission as possible. And therefore, and what I'd like to address just very briefly, if I could, Mr. Chair, is the process for issuing subpoenas by the commission. Right now, we have potentially a very cumbersome process that requires every time the pro bono counsel may wish to have a witness come before this commission, we have to vote on that as a full commission. And I think that there's a process that I want to propose here that will make the commission more nimble in terms of its issuance of subpoenas with respect to witnesses. And so at appropriate time, and this may be the appropriate time, I'd just like to read the motion I'm going to make here and put it on the table. And I think I probably should do it now, just as part of the general discussion with the chair's permission. So,
Sure.
All right. So I'm going to read it, and I will state the motion. But whereas on November 18th, 2021, the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission unanimously adopted a motion authorizing the chair and the vice chair to forthwith secure special investigative counsel on a pro bono basis to conduct a detailed investigation on behalf of the Oversight Commission into the existence of deputy gangs, cliques, or exclusionary subgroups, and to advise the Civilian Oversight Commission on its use of its subpoena power in aid of the investigation. Whereas the chair, pursuant to said motion, has secured the services of lead special investigative counsel for the Oversight Commission's investigation, Bert Deichler, and experienced attorneys from many prominent law firms in Los Angeles, including Kendall, Brill and Kelly, Covington and Burling, Vetter, Price, Winston and Strawn, Bird and Morella, Manat, Phelps and Phillips, Munger, Tolles and Olson, Proskauer and Rose and others, all on a pro bono basis and at no cost to the County of Los Angeles. Whereas some witnesses having knowledge relating to deputy cliques, gangs, and or exclusionary subgroups may not wish to have their identities disclosed or disclosed prematurely. Further, that such premature disclosure in some cases will impede the COC's, the Civilian Oversight Commission's investigation through pro bono counsel. Now, therefore, it is moved as follows. In conjunction with the COC's pro bono counsel supported investigation of deputy cliques, gangs, and or exclusionary subgroups, the chair or the vice chair is authorized to sign subpoenas pursuant to any or all authority of the COC that the COC has to subpoena witnesses before it, following a review and approval of the COC's ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas. All such subpoenas shall be presented to the full Oversight Commission for ratification of the chair or vice chair's actions, period. So that's the motion. I thought it was appropriate to have several whereas clauses in there. So it's understandable why we need to have a procedure that would allow for the protection of potential witnesses who are willing to give testimony, this process, a more streamlined process for approving those subpoenas. So I'm making that motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sean, if
Yes.
I could continue my report and also respond somewhat to what Commissioner Bonner has just at great length proposed.
Sure.
As the chair has indicated, since the ad hoc committee has been regularly meeting multiple times relating to deputy gangs and where we go from here, I believe with the chair's permission that Commissioner Bonner's motion should have been presented to the ad hoc subcommittee, and that it would be appropriate for discussion among other issues relating to deputy gangs in the ad hoc. We are fully aware that the necessity for subpoenas will soon be upon us. As I said, we have been meeting regularly, and there is no reason that could not be initially discussed with the ad hoc committee. Secondly, there has certainly been reference both by Mr. Deixler and by Commissioner Bonner and by the chair to the new state law on deputy gangs. And in that vein, it is essential that we do move forward and get the sheriff to adopt, as the chair has indicated, the policy that this commission approved more than a year ago that the sheriff should adopt. And so one of the issues, again, that we need to consider, and hopefully we will do that soon, is whether it is long overdue for the ad hoc committee and the full commission to urge the board of supervisors to support our proposed policy that we have tried in all different ways for the sheriff to adopt, and he has not. So that is certainly an issue that we will discuss, and also there has been reference to numbers of requests that the ad hoc committee and this commission have made to the sheriff to produce documents to answer questions relating to reports that we believe exist, and some things that, while they may be confidential, that at least there is some substantive response that the sheriff must give. So that will be a subject for further discussion and whether it is now time to move to request a subpoena in that regard. So that's a brief oversight of the work that the ad hoc committee has been doing, supported by the chair, supported by the executive director. We will continue to move forward on all of this and welcome everybody's input. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubin. I appreciate all the hard work the ad hoc committee on deputy cliques and gangs has done here. It's quite a task. I just want to make sure that people, and I'm going to come back to the motion, Rob. I just want to make sure that people have had an opportunity to ask Bert any questions. You know, we have this incredible resource. He's already gone so far. It's just amazing to me, Bert, as someone who's investigated these with students in the past, how far you've gone. Do any commissioners have any questions for our pro bono special counsel? I don't see.
I have one.
Yes.
I wanted to ask Mr. Dykstra. I know we've been having some difficulty getting appropriate conflict waivers and that sort of thing. Has that problem been resolved now? I mean, have all of the firms that are working as pro bono, either through the county council or through the on behalf of the commission, but through county council getting the conflict waivers, or through Loyola Law School, is that all settled now, or are there remaining issues with respect to that? I remember Rick Drew, we were having a hard time getting Rick Drewian a conflict waiver from county council the last time we spoke.
Yes. So Rick Druyan has been approved. The investigator who works so closely with many of us on the CCJV has still not yet been approved. And the Loyola Law School firms, the Winston firm and the Munger firm, are still having to work through another iteration of what I'll call a joint interest agreement. As of last night, we were back and forth with some proposals that are to be considered by the county council as we try to navigate around whatever concerns county council might have. I note that this has gone on for months.
I'm very concerned with how slow this process has gone, and that it actually has delayed our ability to move as quickly as we should be doing in this investigation. So I obviously keep us apprised of that. I know you have to some degree. The other thing is, and this is more, I guess, a response to Bill Rubin's concern that the proposed motion I made didn't go through the ad hoc committee on deputy cliques. We have an ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas, and that ad hoc committee is the actual committee that is concerned with what the process is that should be used here in terms of the COC with respect to the exercise of its subpoena power, whether that's to assist this investigation or any other investigation. So I don't know. I personally, I didn't think it needed to go through your the ad hoc committee on deputy cliques, but I certainly don't think we ought to get into issues of that sort when it's so important to get this investigation moving. And I think, let me ask you, Mr. Dykstra, I mean, would it be helpful for you to have an expedited process that you could use to when you need a subpoena and you've identified that, either because the witness wishes to have a subpoena for cover purposes or otherwise, would it be useful for you to have the process that I outlined in my motion so we can move more quickly and also protect the identity of potential witnesses until such time as they actually appear and testify before the commission? Could you respond to that, sir?
Yeah, sure. So enormously, I have in mind, in particular, two witnesses that we would like to present who have told us they're happy to cooperate, but they must do so pursuant to a subpoena. as recently as this morning, I received one of the things that's happened, I should say generally, and the OIG, I think, has been a beneficiary of this in part. I'm now getting unsolicited inquiries from people or disclosures from people. If it's outside what I think is the heartland of what we're investigating, I've passed them along to the OIG for their consideration. But as recently as this morning, I received a suggestion that there are 2 other witnesses who would be willing to speak with us, provided that they felt doing so was compulsory, even if it is with a wink. And so being able to get a subpoena quickly to accommodate that desire would be very helpful to moving this along.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, Rob, can I just ask on your motion, because we're all, we're hearing it in real time. It contemplates running the requested subpoena if it would come to the chair, because we don't really have a vice chair right now. It would come to the chair. It would have been run by the ad hoc committee on deputy cliques or gangs, and we would discuss it, and then I would sign it, and then it would be later ratified by the entire commission.
Well, the proposed motion I made was that it would be the ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas, not the deputy clerks. And the reason for that is that this isn't just for now. It's not just for this investigation. It's actually this guides the process of the Oversight Commission going forward for all purposes, all investigations. I mean, this is hopefully not our only investigation for oversight purposes. And so we have an ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas, which has, by the way, in the past proposed and had adopted processes and procedures that we have been following. This modifies those processes and procedures. And for that reason, I think it's more appropriate that the ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas be the one that does the review and then submits it to the chair for a signature. And then at the next meeting of the COC, the subpoenas would be ratified by, or it would be proposed that they be ratified by the full commission. By the way, I'm on a number of boards. This is a very common procedure to do the ratification through let's say the board of trustees or the board at a later point in time or at their next meeting, because there are certain things that have to be done in the interim between board meetings, and that's true of our commission. So this is not an uncommon procedure. It's certainly a perfectly appropriate procedure. But yeah, I would think we would continue with the ad hoc committee that is most concerned with the processes for issuing subpoenas, which has been the ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas. And so that's the way the motion's phrased. I'll be happy to reread it when at the appropriate time.
Okay, Patty. You're muted, Patty.
Sorry. Two points I want to make. One is of extreme gratitude and appreciation for the progress that is being made. We've been at this for almost 5 years. And it's kind of exhilarating to see how things have finally speeded up. And having these law firms, and Mr. Drexler, thank you so much for your leadership. And Sean, of course, and Commissioner Bonner and Lael and the ad hoc. This is tremendous work. And I'm also grateful for the transparency of this meeting. We are getting details, and the public is listening in on what progress has been made and where the bumps in the roads are from a very clear, open place. Seems like there's no secrets, and I just want to say thank you for that. My other point is just to reiterate the protection of these potential witnesses, that everything that we can do, everything that you can do to ensure that is critical. This is where we don't want transparency. We don't want their names out there prematurely. So I will support everything and anything that moves to ensure that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else. And I just want to ask someone, maybe Brian, who knows our parliamentary procedures better than I do. Commissioner Bonner has made a motion, and we've had some discussion of it. Is this the time to ask if there's a second and have a vote, or would that come later and I should finish the agenda items? We have a couple more reports. I just want to know what is the best way to handle this impromptu motion, because our pro bono special counsel has made it clear that he views this as something important. And so I don't want to ignore it. I want to address it in the most compliant way, where everyone gets to weigh in and it's done properly.
Sure. This is listed in our agenda under reports and possible actions. So I believe we can take some action on this. There does need to be a second to the motion. There hasn't been a second to the motion just yet. After the second to the motion, we'll then have to take public comment prior to the vote. And that should be the order. So a second, public comment, and then the vote on the motion.
Okay. Is there a second to Commissioner Bonner's motion? Am I allowed to make a second?
I believe you are.
I'm happy to second.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Giggins has a second, so I think we now have to have comment.
Yes, so if you would like to make public comment, please raise your hand now in the participant window. If you have called in to the meeting, please press *3 on your phone in order to get in queue to be unmuted. And with that, we do have code of conduct, so please make sure that you are abiding by all of the code of conduct. And before we get started with our first speaker, we will have an announcement in Spanish.
Buenos días. Si desea traducción a sus comentarios de español a inglés, simplemente diga la palabra español antes de comenzar y alguien le dará instrucciones cómo proceder. Gracias.
Sean, could I just say something here, just for a point of order? I actually think it would be worthwhile just to complete the full discussion on this entire issue and report. I guess this was a report of the ad hoc committee on deputy clicks, but finish the report, make sure we're finished with the discussion so that the public comment is on the discussion and any comments on the motion I made. I just kind of like to, if there's some further comment or discussion on the, of this matter beyond my motion, I think we ought to make sure public comment covers both those things. That's all I'm suggesting. Mr. Williams, would you agree with that? And how do you think we should proceed?
I would agree with that. I think it's fine to do it that way. It's a good idea.
I'm so sorry. I thought that Lael had concluded her report, and I had asked if anyone else wanted to interact with Bert, and I didn't get any. So I thought we were done. Is there?
I think maybe we are. I just want to make sure we are.
Okay. Is there any further reporting or discussion before we move to public comment?
Thank you, Sean, for that. I think I've, in a broad view, reported as to the activities of the ad hoc. And I think not only should there be public comment on the motion from Commissioner Bonner, but on the report and certainly on the work of Mr. Deixler and his group. So it's rather than doing this piecemeal, I think it is wise to have public comment on all of the issues that have been reported during the report from the ad hoc committee, including, Sean, your comments initially about what you have been doing as chair and the numerous reports that have been made. So it's a much more expansive topic for public comment.
I appreciate the guidance from a former chair. So we're going to have public comment about everything we have discussed regarding deputy gangs, including Commissioner Bonner's motion. So can we move to members of the public who want to weigh in?
Yes, we will get started with the first public comment. We will have 2 minutes on the timer, and the first person will be MJ King. You're unmuted. Please go ahead with your comment, MJ.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Commissioner Kennedy's acknowledgement. This commission has gone a year without adoption of any of your proposed policies, and that this commission needs to act. The IG's report, thank you, Max Huntsman, as always, for your reports. On body-worn cameras, noted that an unarmed civilian died at the hands of LASD. The report identifies the inconsistency of LASD's stated objective for the operation, which LASD used as an excuse for not wearing BWCs. How convenient. This is the story time and time again. On October 5th of 2021, at your recommendation, the Board of Supervisors approved the supplemental budget recommendations for fiscal year 2021 through 2022, which included the body-worn camera project, adding $9 million to LASD for the completion of the BWC project rollout. Take that money back. Stop funding LASD until there is some sort of accountability. It doesn't seem that difficult. This is an oversight commission. Where's the oversight? Regarding the IG's report on Ryan Twyman's murder, this commission has acknowledged many times over that the LASD could not investigate themselves. $4 million will not bring Ryan Twyman back to his loved ones. What are we doing to prevent one more senseless murder at the hands of LASD? No one else should have to experience this tragedy. Time after time, the ad hoc committee acknowledges the deputy gangs operating. When will you support our charter amendment to keep the sheriff accountable? And lastly, I'm curious, although this is going to be a closed session that you've subpoenaed Villanueva to, how is that going to be reported to the public? How are we going to get information on what happens in this closed session? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next we have AJ White. You're unmuted. Please go ahead, AJ. Actually, it looks like we're having a little difficulty unmuting you. I will correspond with you in the chat. We'll move on to Helen Jones. You're unmuted. Please go ahead. Helen Jones.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sean Kennedy and this entire commission for the full investigations that y'all are doing on deputy gangs. We know they exist. Y'all know that they exist, and the sheriff department surely know that they exist. They would do anything to protect these deputy gangs. They was exposed a few years back that most of all the sheriff deputies was all family members. And if this is true, that is one of the reasons why the gangs are so protected by the sheriff department. And this commission should also collect information from sheriff gangs' personal cell phones, because they use cell phones on duty, calling the stations to try to stop supervisors from coming out to the scene when they are requested to come out to the scene, when deputies are pulling over our families and committing the crimes out there on the streets and to family members. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Mary M. You are unmuted, Mary. Please go ahead. Mary M., did you have a public comment on this item?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said Mariana. My apologies.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just have a brief question. MJ King, I did ask one of the questions I had, which was regarding how that private session that's going to take place tomorrow is going to be reported to the public. I would really like that information. And also, I don't know if this is a dumb question, but I feel that it is imperative for people to feel safe to be able to come forward and give their testimonies. So I was just wondering, is there any way that we could ensure their safety? Is there any way that that could be done? I don't know if through protecting their identity. I don't know what can be done. I'm not familiar with the process, but is that something that you guys can consider? And That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And we do have two individuals still signed up for public comment. That is Julie Martinez and Heavenly Hughes. We'll start with Julie Martinez, but if you did want to make a public comment on this item and you did not hear your name called yet, please raise your hand in the participant window or send a chat to the host. And with that, Julie, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Thank you for these very important reports. You are revealing to the public and finally acknowledging to the greater community what the community in East LA and other sheriff-led communities have discovered. Sheriff gangs design their engagement with the public based on direction from gang leadership, and I mean sheriff deputy gangs. As these sheriff gangs operate into criminal conduct, they are approaching their daily policing of LA County residents through the lens or through the requirements of these deputy gangs. These deputy gangs require that they engage in violence, they engage in beatings, and they engage in deputy gang shootings. As they engage in these activities, they gain notoriety within the gangs, and they are thus rewarded by it. I wanted to very quickly highlight that my grandson was killed by a sheriff deputy gang 2 years ago, and we were approached by a community member at that time with a rumor that Deputy Saavedra from East LA was a bandito. At that time, I was shocked, didn't really understand how deeply ingrained deputy gangs were. As it turns out, many reporters and whistleblowers have exposed that Deputy Saavedra was indeed a bandito, and he had a gang moniker which was Listos, which means ready, or ready shooter. It was also, a whistleblower also revealed on a CBS interview that Saavedra was part of the deputy gangs. So please continue forward. Overhaul is long overdue. We in the community have been terrorized by sheriff deputy gangs and will continue until you and the Board of Supervisors can create stronger policies to prevent deputy gangs in the Sheriff Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And next we will have Heavenly Hughes. I just want to make a note, AJ White, I'm unable to mute you. If you can please chat with me in the background and send me your phone number, we'll be able to connect you that way. After Heavenly Hughes, we have Michelle Infante, and that will be the last public comment. Heavenly, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Heavenly Hughes. I am the co-founder of My Tribe Rise, a grassroots community organization focused on police accountability. And we applaud that you are investigating the deputy gang cliques and gang violence happening within law enforcement. We believe that the cities that we service, which is Pasadena and Altadena, have been directly affected by this gang culture and gang mindset within the police department. Recently, or actually about a couple of years now, a resident of Pasadena was shot in the back twice by a Pasadena police officer, and come to find it, shot down dead. He bled out in the streets of Pasadena, and come to find out it was the sheriff's independent report that was given to the district attorney. We all know that part of the gang culture that is being addressed today is to cover up violence. And so I am thankful to hear that you guys are investigating law enforcement, because the sheriffs does oversee in Altadena and is very active in Pasadena as well. And we believe that our Pasadena Police Department has been infiltrated and influenced by this gang culture. And we ask that police be held accountable. I'm thankful for this civilian oversight that is really putting efforts and work into stopping violence and gang violence within law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Michelle Infante and then Andres Kwan. Michelle, please go ahead.
This is criminal misconduct that the Sheriff's Department does, and that you continue as a commission to call them cliques and subgroups is insulting to the family, especially when you have deputy gangs killing Black and brown folks on patrol. You have deputy gangs killing Black and brown folks while in custody, deputy gangs raping women at CRDF, deputy gangs filing false investigation reports with ambiguity, lack of clarity. We have deputies without name badges. We have deputies turning on and off their body cameras when they're involved in physical or gun violence. We have staged criminal scenes. We have character assassination in almost every investigation report to make the other person look bad and to create a false narrative around the sheriff's department. You have deputies who are intimidating families in the community, and that's creating a very unhealthy health and wellness for families out there in the community. You do a disservice by constantly calling these people subgroups. They're deputy gangs. There's deputy gangs on the 3000 floor. They've killed Helen Jones's son. They killed Jelani Lovett. These are deputy gangs, and you continue to torture these families and act like you're doing them a favor by creating these situations where you're going to bring deputies in and have a talk to them, but yet you still don't acknowledge what they are. They are deputy gangs. They're killing people in our community. Stop giving them the slightest justice by telling people here who have lost their loved ones, who's not lost their loved ones. I apologize for that. Their loved ones have been killed. There's no lost loved one here. They've been stripped. They've been stripped of their family member, and it takes an emotional toll on these families. And you continue to call them subgroups and cliques. They're deputy gangs. Call them what they are.
And next we will hear from Andres Kwan. This is the last public comment. Please go ahead, Andres.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Andres Kwan. I'm with the ACLU SoCal. And I've said this time and time again, how we've been facing an all-out crisis with Sheriff Villanueva and his department, to the point that to us at the ACLU Southern California, Villanueva represents the single greatest threat to Angelino civil liberties. Many even call him the Trump of Los Angeles. Just 2 weeks ago, you may have seen, I'm sure you saw, that the court-appointed monitors in the jails, pursuant to the settlement and consent decree in our Rosas v. Vaca case, issued a scathing report, and there is clearly a serious and long-standing problem with deputies in the jails using unnecessary and excessive force, including brutal shots to the head, what they call headshots, brutally punching folks inside in the head, initiating force rather than taking steps to avoid it, and then fabricating reports to justify their actions. This is not new. Much of this came out through the ACLU SoCal report more than about a decade ago, and the CCJV report. But this problem festered because supervisors turn a blind eye to excessive force and dishonesty, and no one is disciplined. There is impunity within the department under Villanueva, and violations of the consent decree have gotten significantly worse under him. Commissioners, as the board charged you to investigate and to come up with recommendations, holistic recommendations to how to eradicate deputy gangs and related issues, we ask you to go big. We ask you to support the charter amendment that we've been proposing alongside our community partners to maximize civilian oversight
conclude your time.
And checks and balances.
And Chair Kennedy, that does conclude all of the comments for item 2, reports and possible action.
Thank you so much. So we've had public comment. I just want to make sure every commissioner got to speak. Otherwise, I think we should have a vote. It's Rob, can you read the actual motion one more time and then we can vote on it?
I'd be happy to. If with your permission, Chair, I will skip the 3 whereas clauses and just go to the motion.
Yes.
which would read, now therefore it is moved and seconded as follows. In conjunction with the Civilian Oversight Commission's pro bono counsel-supported independent investigation of deputy cliques, gangs, and/or exclusionary subgroups, the chair or the vice chair is authorized to sign subpoenas pursuant to any or all authority of the Civilian Oversight Commission that the Civilian Oversight Commission has to subpoena witnesses before it, following a review of the Oversight Commission's ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas. All such subpoenas shall be presented to the full COC or Oversight Commission for ratification of the chair or vice chair's actions, period. End motion.
Leo.
For point of clarification, Commissioner Bonner, is it your motion's intention that the special counsel go directly to the chair or vice chair in terms of submitting a request for a subpoena, or does it go through the subpoena ad hoc committee first, and then the chair signs it, and then it is ratified before the entire commission? I think that it needs some clarification.
Mr. Dykstra could go to either. He could, however it's most efficient for him, he could just request, he could give the person's name to the chair who would refer it to the ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas, or he could just refer it to the ad hoc committee regarding subpoenas, whatever's most convenient. There'll be a review, and then the chair will, and by that committee, and then the chair will sign the subpoena and provide it for service on the witness. So it could be either, Leo.
Okay. Should we have a vote?
1 second, I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Sean. I just want to clarify. I can't remember who's on that committee. I remember we started it when I was chair. We organized that committee. I can't remember who's on that committee. I'd like to review that. But more importantly, does this mean that the names of these witnesses are, blocked out, that these names are confidential as it goes through our process?
Oh, yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah. The names would be confidential as they
Right.
go through this entire process.
Okay, good.
If we can, and this would be special counsel, if the special counsel can then convince that witness to come before the full body here to testify under oath before this commission, and I believe he's going to be able to do this in certain instances, still that witness will want a subpoena. Then, of course, the witness's identity would be disclosed at that point, but not until that point. In other words, you're able to preserve essentially the confidentiality or protect the identity of the potential witness, and at least until that point in time, which is of, as Mr. Deichler said, is of some significant value when you're conducting this kind of an investigation. Did I answer both you also asked who's on the committee. Well, you appointed me, I think, Patty, to be the chair of the committee, so I know I'm on it. The last time I checked, Sean was on it. I believe JP was on it, according to my notes. I'd have to go back and check on that. We might have to have the executive director.
That's correct. It's Bonner, Harris, and Kennedy.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. And it's good that you're all still here.
Right.
Leo?
I would urge the chair to appoint Commissioner Hicks to the subpoena subcommittee. We need to get him involved in his incredible talents, and I think that this would be an appropriate way to start. I just think it's probably not a good idea to have just one or two people on the subpoena subcommittee. So that would be with, of course, Commissioner Hicks's agreement. I would think that that would be appropriate.
Jamon, what do you think?
I appreciate the I don't know if it's a nomination or the recommendation. So yes, I would accept if appointed. Thank you, Commissioner Rubin.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and it really will help all of us to have multiple sets of eyes as we move through the expedited subpoena process, because I really want to support Mr. Deichsler in this investigation in every way that we can. It's a great addition to the ad hoc committee on subpoenas. And is anyone else like to speak before we move to a vote?
Mr. Chairman, just one quick thing. If at all possible, if there are subpoenas that are forthcoming to the ad hoc committee, if you could just provide the executive director notice of that subpoena as well, so we can keep track.
Yes, yes, of course. Can we have a vote?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Bonner,
Aye.
Commissioner Giggins,
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks,
Aye.
Chair Kennedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Rubin,
Yes.
motion carries. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Bert, I really appreciate you taking time to report to us. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda because it's almost 10:30, and keep us posted how we can continue to support you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the commission and the opportunity to be involved in this investigation. It's very important and meaningful to me. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a report from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, an update. If any representative of the Sheriff's Department is here and would like to give an update, we would love to hear from you. It doesn't look like we're there yet. So I'll move on to the next item, which is a report or update from our county council. Alex, would you like to make any remarks?
Yes, Chair. I just want to reiterate and highlight what Max said to the commission earlier, that the sheriff's appeal of the court's order to appear before OIG has been summarily denied. The COC's, the petition to enforce the COC's 3 subpoenas from last year is pending, and there is a case management conference in that case in May, so we expect to have a further update of that litigation in the near future.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for county council? I don't see, so I really appreciate it, Alex, for the brief update. And we're going to move to agenda item number 3. And this is about conditions of confinement in the LA County jails. And specifically, we were at a couple prior meetings, we were talking about the Century Regional Detention Facility.
Mr. Chairman, if I can interject just for a quick moment, we did have a person call last night who wanted to give a family impacts remark, and she's available at this point.
I am so sorry. We ordinarily start with the family impact remark. It's one of our most important parts of our meeting, and I was incorrectly told that we did not have anyone who wanted to speak. So that said, we're going to take testimony from someone's going to make a family impact remark from the family of Jelani Lovett.
Thank you. And Terry Lovett, you are unmuted.
How are you?
You are unmuted now. You have 10 minutes. Please go ahead when you are ready.
Okay, I'm Jelani's mother. I have a couple of issues that I'm not satisfied with the Sheriff's Department. I have been asking for reports, incident reports of everybody that was involved with Jelani's death. I have yet to get the report that the homicide division finished their investigation in December. I've been asking for reports from the deputies that were involved with the death, watch commander report. I've asked for the med reports. I have not. I put in the public, the 10-day public notice for reports. I have not got any. I've sent the sheriff a certified letter. I've sent the records department a certified letter. I've asked for the firemen that came there and pronounced him dead. I've asked for their reports. I have not got any reports. I'm climbing the chain of command because I know there is a chain of command. I'm at the district attorney. So right now, and I'm on my way up the ladder to the attorney general because this is just unbelievable that I can't get reports on what happened to my son. Okay, I've been told by this commissioner that I will be contacted when I was on in January, that someone will contact me from this commissioner. Nobody has contacted me from this commissioner yet. I filed a complaint with the inspector general back in November, and supposedly they had 30 days to comply with the complaint. I got a response from a Lieutenant Jamie Alvarez from the Sheriff's Department March 24th, stating that homicide was through with their investigation, directing me back to homicide for any concerns I had. Okay, so that's just sending me around in a circle. And my question, if it wasn't a homicide, why is the homicide investigators investigating the case? They said that he was self-inflicted with drugs. I mean, which I find that hard to believe because how does somebody in solitary confinement do drugs? And I've noticed on the news there's been several ODs in LA County Jail from fentanyl. How's all these drugs getting into the jail? The officers have to be bringing it in. These gangs that y'all have in the jail, I know the 3,000 boys killed my son. You know, I'm really praying and hoping that y'all do something about these gangs because people shouldn't come to jail to die. And it seems like that sheriff down there is just out of control. He do what he want to do. He don't have no laws that he has to follow. But he's going to follow some. He's going to follow some laws because laws are put in place to be followed. And as we as civilian has to follow him, he has to follow them too. But nobody in LA seems to make him follow the law. The subpoenas, he don't answer to y'all's subpoenas. Who do he think he is? You know, I'm just very disappointed in the process. The process that I've gotten as far as cooperation, because the law says that the sheriff's department is supposed to cooperate with me with the investigation. Let me know where they are with the investigation. I am allowed and entitled to reports on what happened to my child, but I'm not able to get anything, and I don't understand that. So, you know, basically that's all that I have to say is I don't understand y'all's reasoning down there. I don't understand how nobody makes him follow the law. You know, these gangs within the sheriff's department, gangs ain't supposed to go on in the sheriff's department. You know, if they're part of a gang, they should not have a job, not overseeing other inmates. So basically that's my only statement that I have for the commissioner. I would like to, somebody said that somebody from the commission would be getting in touch with me. Nobody has gotten in touch with me. I've tried to contact the commission, and I've been unable to. So I'd appreciate if somebody would contact me back from the commission, because I'm having a hard time dealing with this. I'm really having a hard, because there's no transparency from the coroner to the sheriff. The coroner, even though they're supposed to be two separate entities, the coroner seems to be covering up for the sheriff. So thank you for listening to me this morning. That's all that I have to say. But it needs a lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lovett. I can hear your frustration and pain, and I am so sorry that we have not gotten back to you. Ryan, is there a way we could get contact information? There's always serious problems getting compliance with the Public Records Act. and also with the coroner's office because of the holds that the sheriff puts on them. And if someone from our staff could get the contact information, I'm happy to talk to Ms. Lovett about it, because I have lots of Public Record Act frustrations, and so maybe we could strategize together how to get the information she wants.
Sure, we have her contact information now, and we'll follow up and also provide that information to you as well.
Much appreciated. Lil, you want to say something?
Yes, I'm glad that there's going to be some follow-up from Ms. Lovett, because it is essential that she gets some answers to some of her questions rather than sitting and waiting. But backing up a little bit and not taking away anything from the emotion and the difficulties that she's had, there were several public comment requests to really the Inspector General and Max Huntsman as to whether there can be any public statements from the Inspector General following his interview tomorrow with the sheriff. So I think that the public is entitled to hear that directly from Mr. Huntsman. If you could respond to that, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubin. Yes, we received a number of inquiries from press, as well as you heard from the public. People are interested appropriately in the sheriff's testimony regarding gangs. As you know, this body has subpoenaed him as well. He brought a motion in the litigation in which he was attempting to avoid speaking to us to quash your subpoena as well, and that was rejected. So that litigation is ongoing, as County Counsel informed you, and I hope that eventually it will result in him sitting before this body, as he's required to do by law, and publicly talking about deputy gangs in a way that the public can hear directly. As to my subpoena, that's an investigative subpoena. Like Mr. Dykstra, we're conducting an investigative process into Penal Code Section 13670, and so it is not public at this time. We will likely make a statement about it after it happens, about how it went or where it went, but we won't be disclosing the answers given by the sheriff, if there are any, or initially at least, because of the active investigation, working with Mr. Dykstra and this body to make sure that the gangs are properly investigated, requires care and caution to keep my staff and myself safe, and to protect witnesses and protect confidential information within the Sheriff's Department. So we will maintain that privately. Not saying we won't at some point put out information about how our investigation goes. We certainly plan to do that, because I'm very cognizant of people's desire to know what's happening, and I too appreciate the candidness of Mr. Dykstra in this whole process. So we will certainly do that eventually, but at least initially it's not public. But we do hope that the sheriff will be speaking publicly on this subject here at the Civilian Oversight Commission. If he chooses to respond to the subpoenas he's already been issued, then he'll be part of your investigation. He'll be coming here and answering your questions. We'll see if that happens or when that happens.
So at the very least, then, it is your intention to issue some kind of a statement. The sheriff appeared today, he answered questions, or he didn't, something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, we'll give an update as to what happened, just the basic facts of it, because if he doesn't answer questions, then there's a process to go to court and litigate the propriety of that, and we will certainly pursue that with County Counsel's assistance, as they have been assisting throughout this process, to make sure that the county's interests are vindicated. I should say County Counsel will do that under statute. That's their authority to do that, but we've been working closely with them, and they've been, the strong arm of the subpoena process for us. And so we will continue to work with that. And I anticipate if he doesn't answer the questions, we will go to court and argue that he should, and a judge will rule on whether or not he will. So I can't promise that he'll be held to the full letter of the law, because that's outside my authority, but I can promise that I and everybody I'm working with will work very, very hard to see that happens. And we will do that, and we will report on the process, not necessarily the content of the statements.
Thank you. Patty.
Yes, thank you. I want to bring it back to Ms. Lovett and the fact that she has been in the dark for regarding information for many months. And this, I'm going to ask if Mr. Williams, if you can check and see if there's a way for her to be connected to the Family Assistance program. I know that it's still under construction about getting institutionalized at the board level and fully funded. But I know that Max Huntsman and Katie Belts, I know there's discussion about including all jail deaths as part of that advocacy. I don't know where that is. I know that was one of the options to be able to go and include that so that families can get advocacy and support. So if I'd just like to ask Mr. Williams to further check up on that and see if it's possible to get some help for this family.
Sure, we'll reach out to Ms. Lovett again. And I do want to report that the board did in fact pass a motion this past week to fully fund the Family Assistance Program. So that was good news.
Oh, do we have any more information on that?
I can send you a copy of the board motion. I'll send it out to the commission.
Okay, good. So it's fully funded and operational?
It's fully funded. Operational is, they have to continue.
Well, could this be on our agenda for next month and follow up on all of this?
Sure, the chair agrees with that.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Helping the families of people who have died in the custody of the sheriff or out on the streets is one of the most important things we do. So I appreciate the suggestion, Patty. We're going to go back to CRDF. And during our last meeting, concerns were brought up about programs available at CRDF. And this morning, we have the Sheriff's Department, their Acting Director of Food and Gender Responsive Services, Dr. Melissa Kelly, joining us to give everybody an overview of the programs that are available at the facility. Dr. Kelly, I want to thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here today. I oversee gender responsive services, and recently I also took under my command food services a few weeks ago. I oversee programs and services that are education and rehabilitation based at CRDF. Often you hear the acronym EBI, education-based incarceration. Currently, the staff that I have loaned out to me are EBI staff, but gender responsive services actually operates independent of that design and actually has a lot more responsibilities under its scope. So besides direct service provision, where we provide the education and we provide the rehabilitation, we are also tasked with creating internal and external linkages, environmental improvements, anywhere from social, physical, cultural, and really trying to have an impact overall with system responsivity. We are a newer unit in the Sheriff's Department. We were created out of a board motion in 2019 with expanded scope from two other board motions in 2020 and 2021. I was hired, by the way, in January 2020, right before COVID. So it's been a really interesting launch point before a global pandemic. And as you know, other people have discussed earlier, completely unfunded or under-resourced. There were 3 items that were originally funded. I do not have any of the other funded items besides myself, but I do have loan items available to me. I currently have 5, however, one is light duty and the other individual is actually leaving for a new assignment. So just to give some context, before COVID, EBI at CRDF had 11 items that were funded, and I clearly have a much more expanded scope, but limited resources. And beyond just working at CRDF, I'm really also supposed to be working at other facilities with gender nonconforming individuals, but we really can't even do what we want to do at CRDF, and so we have not been able to have an expanded scope at any other facility to date. But even though we've had a lot of challenges, both with things that are going on in the larger global context, we have been able to, address a lot of a lot of needs, although there are many more that are unfortunately unaddressed every single day. And I often go home feeling like I fail every day just because the list grows longer and the needs become more and more acute as time goes on. But during, well, I should say prior to COVID, there were academic opportunities, high school life skills classes, vocational training, therapeutic opportunities. We have tried to maintain as many of those programs during COVID. Some of them have been lost just because of service provider limitations or because of structural issues in terms of what we needed for staffing or COVID provisions. But we have been able to innovate. As you all know, there's low technology utilization and implementation in the jails, in large part because of infrastructure, but we have been able to leverage technology to do a lot of distance learning. We brought college to CRDF for the first time ever during COVID. We launched a partnership with WEDAX to bring some workforce development training and case management to the women. And, you know, besides just the services that we're providing, we've also, like I said, are operating on a larger level. We are helping open a FIP step down unit to really target better service provision to individuals that are high observation, very high need mental health issues. We are also working on opening up our green space. Currently, the women can't go outside unless they're going to court or a medical appointment, which is not remotely in parity with what a lot of the men have opportunities for. And so we're in the process of acquiring funds and working on some large renovations in that context. We're also just trying to improve overall system processes, working with stakeholders, not only for everyone at the facility, but also for like vulnerable targeted groups such as the pregnant women and other individuals that, like I said, with mental health population that have increased needs. And we're continuing to do that work, you know, despite many challenges. But I really appreciate the opportunity to, you know, talk briefly about what we are doing there. Do you have any specific questions about the services that we are providing?
Let me ask, thank you for that information. Do any commissioners have questions for Dr. Kelly? Looking,
Can you hear me? Can you
yes,
hear me?
yes,
Okay,
we can.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Dr. Kelly, thank you for your efforts, even though you seem to be stymied along the way here. But I know this is, I don't want to, this is a minor thing, but when you say items, I've heard this before. Is items people, are those employees, hires?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. They're staffing items. Yeah, sorry for the technical speak. Please interrupt me at any point if I use jargon. It's an unfortunate world we live in. I'm always having, you know, to Google these things too, because I don't know what they are. But yeah.
Yeah, I was a little confused. So, okay, thank you.
It's okay.
Anyone else? You said people can attend college at CRDF.
Yeah, so we have a partnership with College of the Canyons, which is out of Santa Clarita. They provide college classes to our participants. Our hope is, I mean, if you're incarcerated either for a short period or long period of time, that you can at least obtain your AA or BA if you're there long enough, or to make sure that people that were already in higher education opportunities before coming to the facility are able to continue that. We would love to expand that scope, but this is actually a free service that's provided to us from College of the Canyons. They've been able to leverage a lot of the different adult education funding to provide the service, and they're one of our best partners, and I really would love to publicly thank the administration there for working with all the complexities that we've had. And so we've provided geography classes, psychology classes, we've done music, literature. We're actually going to have a chemistry class this fall, so that's going to be exciting. And we're always looking to expand our opportunities. We would love to be able to provide, some type of four-year education, but that's, in the process, it's one of many things that we have identified as necessary. And it's important to really look at those type of services, because I think in a lot of respects, like, we often take a very low resolution approach to the population that's there. We always talk about them in general terms, but in the jail setting, and especially in the Los Angeles County jail system, we have such a dynamic population that really, in my 4 short years that I've been here, has grown in acuity. We have people that are here for literally minutes to here over decades, and having a lot of diverse needs. And it's very challenging giving, aging infrastructure and a lack of expertise and really not the space to provide rehabilitation and reentry services to an incredibly complex population that's just really dynamic. And I think that we don't talk enough about who is inside, which allows us an opportunity to really target the types of resources that are needed. Unfortunately, there's really a need to have a lot of human capital to help these people, and it's just lacking, and it's failing in a lot of regards.
Well, I appreciate your commitment to rehabilitation and your honesty with us. Does anyone else have a question? If not, thank you so much, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you.
We are almost at 11 o'clock, and we have gone a long time. So it's time for us to take a break. And so we're going to take a 15-minute break. My computer says it's 10:53, and we'll come back in 15 minutes. That would be 11:08, I think. So I'll see everyone in a few.
We are about 1 minute away from our break ending. So if you are a commissioner and you are back in front of your camera, please turn your camera on so we will know when we have quorum. Thank you. And we will just check in with Mr. Hicks and Mr. Bonner. If you are in front of your camera, please turn your camera on. And we'll know if we have quorum to resume the meeting.
Sean, I believe we can start the meeting since we had a quorum initially.
Yeah, why don't we begin? I'm going to move to our next topic. It's also related to the situation in custody. I'm sorry to report that there's been a recent increase in custody deaths. And we thought it was worthwhile to discuss the possible reasons for that increase and the practices that follow each in custody death. And so we have several speakers. We have Chief Sergio Aloma from the LASD Custody Division, and we have the Director of Correctional Health Services, Dr. Timothy Belovich, and we have our Assistant Inspector General, Katie Belts, to talk about this. The Commission really appreciates all of you being here to talk about this topic. It is so important to the families of people in custody and to really everyone. And so I'm going to start with Chief Aloma and have him address the issue first, and then we'll move on to Dr. Belovich and the Inspector General, Katie Belts.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss this very important topic with the Commission this morning. We believe that any and all in custody deaths are a tragedy. Any loss of life of a human being, particularly those in our care and custody, are a tragedy. To that note, I did listen to and hear Ms. Lovett's comments regarding her son Jelani, who died in our custody last year. If I can get her contact information, I'd be happy to personally reach out to her and see if we can answer some of her questions. Obviously, that's an ongoing investigation, but we do want to make sure that she's heard and that her questions are answered.
Thank you very much.
No, absolutely. We know that, anytime there's a loss of life, that it does cause, and we listen to Ms. Lovett's comments and the passion and love in her voice for her son. We know that these things cause anxiety and stress for the families of those that are in our custody, and so we do take this very seriously. Dr. Kelly, during her presentation, mentioned that we have a very unique jail population, which includes pretrial, county sentence inmates, AB 109 inmates, flash incarcerations, those waiting transfer to state prisons. Last year in 2021, state prisoners waiting transfer to state prisons accounted for 3,000 individuals in our custody. Dr. Kelly also touched on the mental health population. Currently, our mental health population in custody accounts for 44% of our population. In 2012, just 10 years ago, it accounted for 17%. So that's a significant increase. However, given those challenges with that the population that we have in our facilities, we are fortunate to have a collaboration and a partnership with Correctional Health Services. to provide a constitutional level of care for those in our custody. Dr. Belovich, Dr. Henderson, Program Manager Joan Hubble, these are all folks that we collaborate with on these issues. To that, any in custody death triggers a very comprehensive analysis through the process of a death review. This starts with each and every death, a 24-hour review, followed by a 7-day, followed by a 30-day. These reviews are attended by a number of stakeholders, including Sheriff's Department executives, Correctional Health Services, Department of Mental Health, OIG, our U.S. DOJ monitors, our Homicide Bureau detectives, as well as our in-house custody division training unit. This gives us an opportunity to have a very critical analysis of each and every death that occurs of individuals in our custody. These reviews allow us the opportunity to drill down on the causes of these deaths, and as far as related to whether human error or policy violations or anything that we could have done as a department to improve upon our performance, where we could have done better or differently. An example that I'll give to you is last year we had an in-custody death at Med Central Jail. It occurred in one of our dorm settings. In that dorm setting, we have required by Title 15 to do 30-minute safety checks of those that are housed there. After this particular death, Dr. Belovich wanted us to do 15-minute checks. So that really required us to increase our staffing, but it's staffing that we don't necessarily have, which it created unfunded positions or items, as was mentioned earlier, so that we can accomplish 15-minute checks, so that we can check in on that population on a more frequent basis. That's just one example of a corrective action that was taken in a death last year as a result of our reviews. As I talk about staffing, in 2021, custody division experienced over 1,000 positions that were cut from our sheriff's staffing, both non-sworn and sworn positions, which create challenges for us as we manage this very unique and complex population. We know that also Dr. Kelly referred to antiquated facilities. Med Central Jail, for example, built in 1963, has long worn out its usefulness. We understand that. We believe that we need a care-centric facility for the care of our population by our healthcare professionals. We've also, in the last 2 years, have been dealing with a global pandemic. COVID-related deaths accounted for 20 deaths over the last 26 months. Now, those are individuals that were COVID positive at the time of death, not necessarily deceased as a result of COVID. And then, of course, we have to talk about fentanyl. Just as fentanyl is a epidemic nationally, we see it here in our custody facilities. Last year alone, we had 8 overdose deaths related to fentanyl or other illicit drugs. Just this week, I found out that we have only 4 detectives working these investigations for 7 custody facilities. However, they've nevertheless conducted a significant number of investigations despite their staffing shortages, including search warrants in outside communities outside of custody division that have led to significant seizures of illicit narcotics that were targeted for transportation into our facilities. And then, I want to talk about Narcan. Narcan is something that we've been deploying in our facilities for some time now. Just in 2021 alone, we had 202 Narcan deployments in our custody facilities. That's up from 54 in 2020. We believe that the deployment of Narcan has absolutely saved lives in our facilities. We provide it to our population inside their housing areas where we can. And again, we instruct and provide PSAs to our population on the availability of Narcan and its use. I want to thank the Board of Supervisors for their support this past Tuesday in passing Motion 80, enhancing illegal drug detection in the jails and our courts. Again, we realize that fentanyl is a national epidemic that affects our jails and our communities. So any support that we can have to curtail or mitigate these deaths is absolutely welcomed, and we look forward to reporting back to the board with recommendations to prevent the presence of illicit narcotics in our jails. So over the last 2 years, as I said, COVID and fentanyl deaths have significantly risen in our jail facilities. Last year alone, COVID and fentanyl-related deaths accounted for 34% of in-custody deaths in our facilities. So that is something that we take seriously, that we are coming up with ways to prevent the flow of narcotics into our jails. I'll let Dr. Belovich talk about strategies related to COVID and other deaths in our jails. But again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Commission today, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Lael, you have a question?
Yes, quickly. Thank you, Chief Aloma. It has been reported that you don't have a protocol for notifying family of deceased inmates and their attorneys. Is there some protocol that the Sheriff's Department uses so that they can be notified in a timely manner? You talk about 24-hour review, 7-day review, 30-day review, but nothing in any of your comments this morning relate to what your time frame is for notifications, which is very important.
I agree. It is very important. We do have a protocol that allows us to make a notification of the Family Assistance Program. They have an advocate that reaches out to the family, and that is our current process. I believe that Captain Mendoza from Homicide Bureau may be on the line, so he may be able to further answer that question for you, but that's my understanding and how that process works to make notification to families.
So it goes through the Family Assistance Program. What about notifying attorneys of record?
That's also handled through Homicide Bureau, who handles the investigation. And to answer an earlier question, all in-custody deaths by policy are handled by Homicide Bureau detectives.
Okay, any other questions? Chief Aloma, thank you so much. We're going to turn to Dr. Belovich.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tim Belovich, the Director of Correctional Healthcare Services with the Department of Health Services. And I wanted to echo some of the things Chief Aloma said. I won't cover as much of the information on the death review process, but I'm happy to answer any of those questions. I was going to focus more on some of the causes of deaths that we experienced in 2021 and some of the patterns we saw and some of the things we've tried to do to address those. To just add on a little bit, I think you'll hear me echoing some of the themes you've heard from other speakers today, having to do with staffing, having to do with funding, and some of those challenges that prevent us from increasing some of the efficiency and quality of the work we do. But in 2021, we unfortunately recorded 50 deaths here in the jail in our care. 48 of those deaths were actually in the care of Correctional Health Services at the time. 2 of the deaths we experienced were suicides that occurred at station jails, and those individuals were not yet in our care. We did have an increase in COVID deaths, I think as people are aware. In 2026, we experienced 26 deaths. We had additional deaths in 2019 of 32 deaths. And then when COVID hit, that's when we really started to see an increase in the deaths. 2020 saw 38 deaths, with 9 of them being recorded as COVID deaths. 2021, the worst year we've had, we had 50 deaths, with 9 being recorded as COVID deaths. But also in 2021, we saw in the early part of the year, we saw an increase in suicides. We actually experienced a total of 8 suicides in the first 6 months of the year, 7 of those in our care. One of the things we did in response to that was we didn't get any additional staff to handle that, but we decided to divert staff from one of our facilities to another facility. So we saw an increase in suicides in our population at Men's Central Jail. And we diverted several staff to increase the staffing there. And as Chief Aloma said, we asked that there be some increase in the safety checks that custody performs at that time. We think that that had a positive impact on our ability to see patients over there. And we actually were seeing a lot of our patients, a lot of people who were not in the mental health roles or mental health program. And that's one of the things that comes out of death review. When we are looking at death reviews, we look at, was it an individual who had a challenge or didn't perform correctly? Is it a policy that needs changing and updating or revamping, or is it a more systemic issue that that needs to be improved? And then we try to react to that. And I think we've done what we can with the resources we have in order to do that. Additionally, I think last year we saw a lot of, as the chief said, we saw an increase in our overdoses in fentanyl, and I know he's addressed that a little bit. It's been a challenge. What we've done is we've done our best to get Narcan everywhere we can in our jail system, so that if individuals do have a need, it can be employed. At first, we were using it only staff had Narcan, and we've realized that there were instances where our patients were actually overdosing, and other inmates knew about it but were afraid to raise their hand and say this person was having trouble. So we have made as much as we can Narcan ubiquitous among the inmate population, so that they can employ it if needed in those instances. So those are some of the responses that come about from our deaths. Again, some of the challenges, to echo what Dr. Kelly said, we're recording right now over 6,400 in our mental health programs today. When I started here over 6 years ago, we had 3,500 in our mental health program. So we've seen a significant increase in the mentally ill and in the acuity of our patients. We've seen the same in terms of the medical care that's needed. What we haven't seen is a significant change in our staffing or our budget, unfortunately. Our budget in 2019, 2020 was $380 million. And our proposed budget for this coming year is $383 million to provide care. We have the challenges that I think the county has, but we also have the challenges that we see in our community right now. Healthcare workers are sought after, and there's a war for talent, and we in the county can't respond very well to that war. On a very, very aggressive hire, I can get someone hired in 5 to 6 months. More often, it's 6 to 8 months to get someone on board, and people just have too many options to wait around for that county position. So we are working with the CEO and the board on ways to incentivize or to increase the ability to attract people. But it's very slow moving, as I think many of these things are. So those are some of the challenges we're facing. Again, I know I've hit on a lot of numbers and a lot of things in a very short amount of time, But if I can answer any individual questions, I'm happy to do that.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Dr. Belovich? Just checking to see if. Why does it, can I ask, why does it take so long to hire someone? It sounds like kind of a crisis you're in with
Yeah.
the rising deaths.
It's not just Department of Health Services. It's not just correctional health. It's a general county concern. In fact, there was a board motion earlier this week that is looking to help especially within the healthcare sector, us to become a little more efficient with the hiring. I think part of it is it's a very linear process where you have to go through the steps in order, whereas I think other places you can do your background, you can do your credentialing, you can do your fingerprinting, sort of simultaneously. I don't know that the county often works that way, but also just the hiring process with county lists and things takes quite a bit of time. Yeah, okay. We do run a lot of vacancies. But we do also work with registry staff to bring in registries where we can. That's become very difficult in the last 2 years because registry staff have quite a few more options than they did a couple of years ago.
Okay, well, I hope it gets better for you. I'm sorry that it takes so long to hire. No one else? If not, we'll move on to our Assistant Inspector General, Katie Belts. Thank you, Doctor.
Sure.
And Katie, it looks like we need to unmute you. And Katie, are you speaking now? Am I the only one who cannot hear her?
No, I can't hear.
Katie, if you do have any other applications open, such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom, those may be using your microphone. Go ahead and close those out. The next course of action would be right next to your red X. There's 3 little dots. Click on there and go to audio connection. And let's see if that will reset you. I know your audio was working just fine before, so. You're still not hearing you. And what we can also do, Katie, is if you have a phone number that you would like to send to me, I can have the system give you a call.
Chair Kennedy, while that's being worked on, can I address an issue raised about staffing?
Sure.
A mention was made from the Sheriff's Department about being down 1,000 custody deputies. I want to point out that there's been quite a bit of attention to the budget of late, particularly by the sheriff claiming defunding of the police. And recently there were news accounts of folks who crunched the numbers and found that the number of positions and budget of the Sheriff's Department hadn't gone down at all. And that in fact, the sheriff's claim, as he expanded upon, was based upon the idea that he was entitled to a certain percentage of all the money that the county had, and that his absolute amount was the same, but his percentage had gone down. And I think that's important because the Sheriff's Department decides how many of their staff to put in which positions. And so it is true that the number of deputies in custody is smaller than it should be and not effective in the situation we're in, which we're about to hear some things from Ms. Belts. But that's a Sheriff's Department decision about where to put them. And we also heard about certain other sort of supplemental work that we've encouraged and that we continue to encourage. Again, it's nice sometimes when somebody gets additional money, such as with the drug searching, but the primary function is meant to be under the sheriff's department, and the sheriff allocates his resources, how much to PR, how much to custody, how much to patrol. And in the case of custody, we have repeatedly recommended a dual track system, which is provided for in the penal code, that the sheriff's department has refused to implement. Having said all that, we'll see if Ms. Belts is now able to speak.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. My apologies. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for having us. I just really quickly want to also extend my personal condolences to Ms. Lovett, and also on behalf of the Office of Inspector General. And I'm so sorry that you've felt thus far as though you haven't gotten the information that you need, and hopefully having a conversation with the chief will help with some of that. I also just want to apologize if, as I imagine this conversation about deaths in custody is likely painful, and apologize in advance for any extent to which my contribution to this conversation contributes to any pain that you're experiencing. Okay, so just going ahead, thank you, Jennifer, for the slides. If we could just go ahead and start with that second slide, that would be great. This graph basically just represents a much more generalized breakdown of the deaths that have occurred in 2020, 2021, and the first quarter of 2022. But you actually just heard from Dr. Belovich a much more detailed and likely useful breakdown of the very same information. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, Jennifer, if you don't mind. I should just note that there will always be slight discrepancies between the information that we in our office report on in custody deaths and the information that's reported by CHS and LASD. And that's because we also include deaths that occur in the field when a decedent has been detained but has not yet been booked, and their death numbers that are reported do not include those. So as part of the Office of Inspector General's monitoring of in custody deaths, we as you can see, we respond to the scenes of these deaths when they occur at stations or in county jail facilities. We attend autopsies, and we track and review medical examiner reports. We attend all of the aforementioned administrative death reviews, the 24-hour, 7-day, 30-day, 45-day, 60-day, 90-day, et cetera, reviews that occur for each death. And then, of course, we also make recommendations for corrective action or policy changes or other types of systemic reform. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. OIG Inspector Valencia Boyd has been responsible for our office's monitoring of in-custody deaths for the last few years. She has attended virtually every single death review that's happened in that time period. And she pulled cases for the 99 out of the, I think, 108 deaths that occurred, as I mentioned, after decedents had been booked into a station or county jail facility. And she also prepared the information that I'm sharing with you today. So we wanted to provide you, in addition to more general categories of causes of death, a little bit more information about some of the recurring systemic issues that we see emerging related to some of these deaths, which is an area of particular interest and area of focus for us. So of the 99 cases that Ms. Boyd reviewed, 25 of them involved some type of medical or mental health care issue. 30 of the cases involved custody or security issues, and 11 of the cases involved what we're referring to as interdisciplinary coordination between correctional health services and LASD. Thanks so much, Jennifer. I think we're good with the slides. So I'm going to just provide some additional detail regarding some of the recurring systemic issues that we're seeing, and also by way of certain examples from actual cases of in custody deaths that illustrate some of these deficiencies. It's really important, I think, for us to note that the OIG is not offering any legal opinions regarding causation. So that is whether, the facts and circumstances in any of these cases that I'll be sharing with you actually caused the tragic deaths of people in custody. It's also important to note that all of the information that I'm going to be discussing came directly from LASD and CHS records. So it means two things. number one, all of these issues, all the systemic issues were identified by LASD and CHS themselves through their absolutely robust and self-critical death review process. And it also means that the only reason that the OIG even has any of this information or is aware of this information, is able to share it with you now, is because the custody division is transparent with us. They are transparent with our office. They give us access to this information, and we need to acknowledge that and thank them for it. So in terms of some of the recurring systemic issues that we see regarding correctional health services or the provision of medical and mental health care, number one, we see periodic issues with following policies around medication refusal. So that's when a patient has been prescribed a medication and is either generally medication non-compliant, or perhaps in particular cases is refusing to take their medication. In one instance, let's see, a patient who was navigating mental illness was not feeling well and did not respond to the front of a dorm during pill call. Correctional health services personnel unfortunately did not follow up or make adequate efforts to contact that patient to encourage medication compliance. The patient was unfortunately ultimately determined to have died from ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, secondary or as a result of COVID. That is, I need to know it. So it's not to say that had the medication refusal protocol been followed, that this patient would have survived, but rather this was an issue that was identified by CHS and LASD during the death review process. And it resulted in, as Dr. Belovich mentioned earlier, around some of these policy changes, a revised protocol for medication refusals that was put in place, and as far as we can tell, has thus far proven successful. We also see issues with the monitoring of medication regimens and patient medication compliance generally, as well as issues with the timely identification of acute mental health, medical needs rather, and certain issues related to referrals for higher levels of care. In the example that we've identified, a patient appeared to have been over-medicated and possibly experiencing side effects of the medication regimen that they were on, and those side effects are noted to.
Katie, it looks like we've lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
So a patient appeared to have been over-medicated or experiencing side effects from medication, and those side effects are noted to have included drooling, muscle stiffness in the extremities or difficulty lifting arms and walking, fever, vomiting, shivering, trembling hands, locked jaw, struggling to speak clearly, and abdominal pain. So this patient was indeed seen approximately, I think, close to 30 times in the 3 days preceding the patient's death, including in the facility's urgent care. But unfortunately, that patient was not referred for a higher level of care and died in a cell in the jail. So, you know, CHS appropriately completed a thorough medical care review and determined that this patient in fact should have been referred for a higher level of care and sent to the hospital. We've addressed this next issue before this commission in the past, and we've discussed this before. Because of the severe mental health housing and care crisis that we're experiencing in this jail, clinical personnel experienced pressure to declassify patients from a higher to a lower level of care in order to make sure that there's adequate space in the housing that's designated specifically for higher levels of care. In fact, I mean, when we got here in 2013 and 2014, the pressure was so intense that there had actually been implemented by Department of Mental Health leadership at the time a quota system that required, for example, each clinician to declassify X number of patients each day, which is clearly, completely inappropriate and dangerous for patients. That is no longer the case. DHS has put excellent leaders in place who've made huge progress in that area and in other areas as well. But so although that type of pressure no longer comes as much from the top in the form of quotas, or as far as I know in any other way, the effects of years of this pressure to make space in high observation housing areas really linger, and at times they surface in problematic or inappropriate clinical decision making. So in one instance, a patient is documented as having had 2 prior incidents of self-harm while in custody less than 1 month apart. The patient's P levels, so the levels of care and housing levels of care, were reduced from P3 to P1 and from mental health housing to general population housing in a 2-day period. That patient remained in general population at a P1 level of care without any additional assessment or clinical contacts. And that patient ultimately ended up committing suicide 9 months later in a general population housing area. Again, there's no way to determine definitively if additional interventions or perhaps if anything would have prevented the tragic suicide, but CHS appropriately identified the problem in a death review and quickly instituted new policies that, they require, among other things, more frequent clinical follow-up with patients who've been reduced from a higher level of care to a general population level of care. They've also put in place more restrictions on who's permitted to evaluate and reduce patients' levels of care generally. We also see issues with handling and responding to healthcare service request forms. So these are the documents that the forms that patients fill out in order to request medical and mental health treatment. In one instance, an otherwise healthy patient who tested negative for COVID at intake reportedly made 4 separate requests for the COVID vaccine and unfortunately didn't receive one. And that patient died from COVID-related complications 2 months later. This case is a tragic example of a COVID-related issue and what I truly believe and understand is an otherwise exemplary mass vaccination plan that was initiated and carried out jointly by CHS and LASD, but it does illustrate some of the issues that CHS has identified with their really voluminous and massive healthcare service request process and dilemma. Okay, moving on to some of the recurring issues that we see with custody and security. By far, the biggest issue that emerges in the death review process are related to safety checks. So safety checks are the mechanism that LASD uses to ensure that people in custody are safe. The checks are expected to be completed at regular and really staggered intervals, typically every 15 to 30 minutes or so, depending upon the type of housing that's being monitored. In, I think it was 9 of the 99 cases that Valencia looked at, the department identified safety checks that were not timely in violation of department policy. In one case, a patient at intake had indicated that the patient has a mental health diagnosis and was at the time on a psychotropic medication regimen. The patient was appropriately housed in the intake unit and was referred for mental health evaluation for displaying bizarre behavior. There were no safety checks in the 90 minutes prior to the discovery of the patient's body, and that patient was later determined to have died of a fentanyl overdose. So again, given how rapidly patients can tend to decline on fentanyl, there really is no way to know with certainty whether timely checks would have prevented this death. But as has already been discussed, the Sheriff's Department and Correctional Health Services has gone to great lengths, quite admirable lengths, even unorthodox lengths to prevent fentanyl-related deaths, including requiring personnel to carry Narcan canisters on their persons. About effectiveness of potential earlier interventions was appropriately raised. We also saw in 10 of 99 cases, safety checks that were of poor quality. So they were timely, but they were of poor quality, meaning that personnel didn't necessarily confirm the presence of signs of life before scanning the checks as having been completed. In 3 instances, decedents' bodies were found in various stages of rigor mortis, which suggests that they had died quite some time prior to their deaths being detected. In one case, a patient can be seen on CCTV. The patient was sitting on a bench, and the patient can be seen sliding off of the bench and down onto the floor in some form of apparent medical distress. At this moment, custody personnel can be seen completing a group safety check, which included this same patient. And a few hours later, the patient was transported to the hospital and was ultimately determined to have died of a stroke. It's possible that quality checks and subsequent interventions wouldn't have been successful in saving this patient, but again, the question was appropriately raised by LASD and CHS at the death review. I should also note that the Sheriff's Department opened up 10 total administrative investigations from the 99 deaths that were reviewed, and 6 of which were related to safety checks. So there are some accountability efforts being made related to that issue. So as with CHS, we also see issues with the custody personnel sometimes failing to follow custody's medical refusal policies. In one case, a patient reported to a nurse a history of DVT, which is deep vein thrombosis, and reported experiencing current leg pain. The patient's vitals also reflected tachycardia, elevated heart rate, and the patient was referred to urgent care. So during the death review, it was revealed that deputy personnel had documented that the patient refused to be escorted to urgent care, and custody personnel aren't permitted to accept medical refusals. They need to engage medical personnel to evaluate patients to ensure that they're safe to forego medical care. This patient unfortunately died just 1 hour later, and the cause of death indeed included DVT. But it is not to say that in this case, had custody personnel followed policy and engaged medical and assembled an extraction team, all of which takes time, likely more than an hour, in order to escort this patient to urgent care, that the patient would have been seen soon enough to prevent the death if the death was preventable at all. But again, the question was appropriately raised during this patient's review. We also see issues with delayed emergency responses, either in the form of delays in entering a cell of a patient who's identified as being in medical distress, or sometimes in delays in calling for emergency medical assistance. In one case, a deputy can be seen on CCTV doing linen exchange and apparently not noting that the patient had collapsed onto the floor as the deputy delivered the fresh linens. The patient was indeed discovered by another deputy 5 minutes later. Because this patient had reportedly faked a seizure days earlier, deputies waited approximately a minute and a half before contacting, reaching out for emergency medical assistance while they attempted to basically ascertain whether or not the patient was feigning illness. So this patient was determined to have died of a fentanyl overdose. And again, uncertain whether this death might have been preventable with earlier intervention, but the issue was appropriately spotted by LASD and CHS, and the questions appropriately raised in the review. Okay, so moving on to the third set of recurring issues with interdisciplinary collaboration and communication between LASD and CHS. What we see are things like lots of missed medical appointments. We see a lot of cell front medical or mental health evaluations where patients aren't necessarily brought out of their cells to a private or other appropriate space. We also see failures to identify patients who are in medical distress and failures to get them appropriate and timely care, both in the form of custody and medical, potentially being aware of issues and just for whatever reason not intervening. In what I think was the very first example I spoke of, in which the patient wasn't feeling well and didn't respond during pill call, and the medical personnel didn't follow up in a timely way, which implicated issues with CHS's medical refusal policy. At a later stage in the same patient's decline, CCTV shows a deputy standing by and observing the patient in what is fairly clearly a weakened state. The patient's unable to walk without much assistance, and the patient's actually being supported to the patient's bunk by another patient. There is unfortunately no indication that personnel took additional action to report the patient's deteriorated condition to medical or perhaps to anyone else for that matter. So in the death review, CHS and LASD appropriately identified these two missed opportunities for intervention. Finally, and this really speaks to the much bigger care crisis that we have in the jails, in which we've discussed at length. We see deaths that involve circumstances which suggest various forms of quite frankly significant neglect. We see things like undetected weight loss. We see squalid and inhumane cell conditions, hoarded food, trash, and insect infestations. We see clogged or overflowing toilets and just other signs and symptoms of neglect. In one instance involving a patient with a history of hoarding medications, the complex case committee, which I'm happy to explain what the complex case committee is in a little more detail if that's helpful, but recommended frequent cell searches and safety gown changes to guard against hoarding. Unfortunately, the frequent cell searches and gown changes did not occur, so the patient was able to effectively hoard medication and conceal it inside small tears in the patient's safety garment, and that patient was later determined to have died of an overdose. As with most patients on the complex caseload, this patient had a history of assaultive and quite unpredictable behavior, which really does contribute to medical and custody personnel's both reluctance to bring patients out. So when this patient was discovered, the cell was just in extremely poor condition, lots of trash, food waste, etc. And if I recall, this case resulted in custody immediately implementing a policy change that places onus directly on facility command in ensuring that the complex case committee recommendations are being followed, which we believe will prove more effective. With this, I don't want to suggest that interdisciplinary coordination doesn't exist, or for that matter, that any of the systemic issues raised here reflect the totality of jail operations and patient care. I mean, that said, these are very serious issues that emerge in incredibly tragic circumstances, but they are also issues that LASD and CHS have themselves identified in efforts to do better. So I do believe that we need to thank LASD and CHS for their transparency in providing this information and for what I personally believe are genuine efforts to identify and correct some of these deficiencies. So with that, thanks again so much for having me, and I'm happy to take questions as well.
Are there questions? Patty?
Thank you so much, Katie, for this comprehensive review. I just wanted to know, and I think the public would like to know, how often are you going into the jails?
We go into the jails we report regularly, and I apologize sincerely, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but we are in the jails frequently. We're certainly in the jails weekly. Of course, during COVID, there was unfortunately a significant period of time when just a couple of us were going in, Max and I. We also are struggling, of course, with our own staffing issues, but we're in the jails at least weekly and typically far more frequently than that. And I'm happy to get you specific information, and we include the site visit numbers in our quarterlies.
No, that sounds good. I just wanted, I just wanted us all to acknowledge that you really are connected there and that you do go frequently. And it's not just an occasional pop-up, that you're really following, and obviously you've built up trust with the staff there, with the leadership. So keep on showing up for us. Thank you.
Katie, can I ask, like we heard from the Sheriff's Department and Correctional Health Services, Dr. Belovich, it seems like, you know, their view is that they just don't have enough staff to address the kind of issues you talk about, which to me seem like, some of them seem like extreme neglect. Is that the problem? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, can you tell us, like, do you see solutions to the problem of rising deaths, a lot of which seem to be related to neglect?
The barriers that have been described this morning are real. They exist, and it is true. We have not conducted an independent budget or staffing analysis, but these are barriers this is a fact not only existing in this system, but this is the nature of the American jail and prison system and the American carceral state. They are overpopulated, they are understaffed, and they are under-resourced. It is designed that way. We struggle, every jurisdiction struggles with these issues, but we struggle with them immensely. And so I think it's really important to hear what we've heard specifically from Melissa and from Sergio and from Tim about the very real constraints that they face. There are, in terms of solutions, I mean, it's honestly a much bigger conversation, but so number one, absolutely number one, alternatives to incarceration for those navigating mental illness. We have to continue to expand our FIP step down program. Their FIP step down program is truly the most inspiring program.
Katie, we're losing your audio again.
Katie has disappeared, so until she can be heard again, I'll say what she would have said, or a version of it, which is the FIP step program, which she's championed over and over, is really an amazing program. As she says, the larger problem she describes of overcrowding is very systemic. This is not the only place it exists, as she says, and we've repeatedly reported that this jail is above its state-rated capacity, even though it should be well below it, given COVID and the staffing challenges that exist. So the bottom line is that these jails are grossly overcrowded, and as a result, staff are struggling, both medical and custody, to provide appropriate care. And the kind of neglect that you see at times is the people who fall through the crack, for the most part, as a result of insufficient staffing. And as we pointed out, this is a constitutional issue, that people who cannot be safely cared for in custody must be released. But the sheriff has refused to do that. We brought this up when COVID hit. So the deaths that occurred were preventable, in my opinion. And ever since, we've brought up this issue that we're not in compliance with California's own state laws about capacity. And I believe those are, as Katie says, systemically structured in a way that is inappropriate anyway. It is true that there's facility problems, but you know, the county was going to build a new facility, right? There's a whole plan to do that. And I was a proponent of that because of the unconscionable conditions we have in our current jails. And I eventually despaired that it would be done well, because throughout the process, it always lowballed. And as a result, the facility that was going to be built wouldn't have met the need, and it would have been overcrowded, and we would have had the same problem again. So I don't say that not building a new facility is the solution, but it is certainly, I don't think it would automatically fix things if you built a new facility. You need to, as Katie says, work much harder on creating a system that puts people in custody who need to be in custody, and finds other ways to punish people who don't need to be in custody, because we're not good at taking care of people in custody. It's just it's a difficult thing to do. having said that, I think that's as much as I can stand in for Katie. So I hope she's back. If not,
Sorry, am I back?
Yes.
you're back. Excellent.
I mean, I think, Max, I apologize sincerely. I have no idea. This happens to me all the time. It is definitely some huge problem and I don't know how to fix it. So just, I think Max said everything about expansion, the fifth step down. It is absolutely incredible and they deserve 100% kudos and credit for having created the program. They've expanded it now, I think, to 5 different modules, and they need to just simply continue to expand it to every single housing location that confines people with mental illness. You know, I guess I just feel like this might not seem like a very sort of obvious answer to this question, but I really need to say this. You know, the Custody Services Division is the single most challenging assignment in this department. People absolutely dread being sent to work there. It requires tremendous and complex operational agility. It requires memorizing volumes and volumes of information, ever-changing policies and settlement agreements, et cetera. And, you know, most importantly, it requires almost sort of unimaginable emotional fortitude, you know, to spend 10 to 16 hours a day in an environment of abject suffering where you and everyone around you feels ill-equipped to improve conditions for the thousands of people therein, all the while fearing for your own personal safety because of the unpredictability of many incredibly vulnerable patients. It's really difficult. And then, you know, to add what I personally believe is gross insult to injury, it is impossible in this department to become a custody executive without first going out to patrol. This problem is rooted in just this really long-standing and deeply held but utterly misguided belief system that's just been, you know, held and perpetuated by every sheriff for decades. So unless and until an LA County sheriff actually learns about the jail, spends time in the jail, learns about the jails, comes to understand exactly what it is that jail personnel face, and then genuinely and truly comports department promotional policy with that understanding, all of these cultural issues, including the lack of coordination, including any degree of collective complacency that we see, the us versus them mentality, the desensitization to human suffering, the belief, you know, by deputies that they have to serve time working in the jail before they get to become real cops. You know, custody is just going to continue to be the department's dumping ground. Broken morale is going to stay broken. And sadly, the biggest tragedy of all of this is that the human beings, the vulnerable people confined inside this jail are just going to continue to suffer. So valuing custody as a separate workforce is absolutely imperative to this. For any of the other solutions that are implemented, that's something that has to be done. Absolutely.
Thank you, Katie, for offering some insight into the issue. It sounds bad. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Because if not, we can move to public comment on this issue.
Chair, I just wanted to also follow up on this. I mentioned in my executive director report earlier of the possibility of creating an ad hoc committee, perhaps involving both the Civil Brand Commission, our commission, and folks from the Office of Inspector General. I anticipated this report from Ms. Belts, which sort of prompted that whole notion of putting together an ad hoc to further.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Oh, I just suggested that I suggested that earlier in anticipation of the testimony we were going to hear from Ms. Belts, and we'll follow up with you and with the commission on a creation of such an ad hoc committee so that we could follow up on these important issues that were raised today.
Because Brian, I suspect everyone on the commission thinks that's a great idea after what we heard today. I mean, it's really of concern.
Yeah.
Can we take public comment? Because I know this is a issue of huge concern to many members of the public as well.
Sure. So as a reminder for anyone who would like to make a public comment on this item, please make sure that your hand is raised in the participant window. If you have called in, please press *3 to get in queue. And before we get started with our first speaker, we have an announcement in Spanish. Helen Jones will be our first speaker. Please go ahead with the Spanish announcement.
Buenas tardes. Si necesita traducción a sus comentarios de español a inglés, simplemente diga la palabra español y alguien le dirá cómo proceder. Gracias.
Thank you. And Helen, did you want to make a comment on the jails?
Yes, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. The deaths in the jails, we don't know the true causes of these deaths because the Sheriff Department has lied for years about the cause of the deaths of our loved ones. So for the uprise in drug deaths and COVID deaths, please don't take the Sheriff Department at their word because they cover up killings with these same causes all the time. Please look into these deaths that they are discussing and don't trust the cause of death that the coroner put down because they are helping the Sheriff Department cover up deaths also. And the county coroner has been covering up deaths for the sheriffs for years and for decades. They would do anything to cover up these Deputy Gaines crimes because look at the floor. Please look at the floors that these inmates are dying on and the ages of these inmates and what Deputy Gaines are on these floors. Don't let the Sheriff Department feed you this BS. This commission owe it to the families to fully investigate these deaths to see what else could have caused their deaths. Just like the Sheriff Department and the county covered up the death of my son, John Horton. And after today, we will be pushing for a full investigation into the death of the families, of the inmates that you have been discussing today. As community members, as families, community members, and community leaders, we owe this to the inmates that have lost their lives and the victims that have lost their lives to the Sheriff Department over the last years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. And next we have AJ White. You are unmuted, but we are hearing a lot of feedback. We'll come back to you. And Aram Abgarian, you are unmuted. Please go ahead, Aram.
Yeah, how you doing? I used to work at the DA's office, and then I was actually incarcerated at Pitches Detention Center during COVID. I had experience working with the Sheriff's Department while helping them lie, and also on the other side, when they did lie and I couldn't do anything about it, the conditions are absolutely horrific. They completely lied about separating people during COVID in the dorms. Did not happen. Everyone was packed to sardines. That's why it's spread. Clothing was not cleaned. Nothing was cleaned. They did not help us clean during the COVID situation. They threatened to throw you in the hole if you even kind of made a fuss about it. So the whole notion of them helping and trying to protect the people in the jails publicly is a complete fabrication because, well, I went through it and that's a complete lie. They've always threatened to either tase you or try to humiliate you when the COVID situation was going on. There was a clothing shortage. They were trying to force some of us to wear female clothing because they just ran out of clothes. And if you didn't abide, they would threaten to throw you in the hole. So these situations happen all the time, and it's absolutely scary that there's not an investigation or anything like that going on into how these jails are being operated from an inside looking out point of view. And I think that's absolutely scary if we live in, Los Angeles, that apparently is a Democratic, individual supporting county. So it's really scary that the county hasn't been able to make the sheriff do anything except my tax dollars paying for his legal defense fund. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from MJ King. You are unmuted. Please go ahead, MJ.
Thank you. I'd just like to uplift the words that Miss Helen said, like her son, John Horton. Please, OIG, look into the deaths recorded as suicide, because the evidence in his case and many others are suggesting otherwise. I appreciate Dr. Kelly acknowledging the aging infrastructure and lack of expertise to be able to support those incarcerated at CRDF. Women and other folks incarcerated there would be better cared for in the community. Women are commonly heads of families, and incarcerating them are unnecessary, causing ripple effects across our communities. As you know, in November of 2018, the Board of Supervisors agreed to pay $3.9 million to settle claims against the county for Sheriff James McDonald and Deputy Giancarlo Scotti for sexual assault and rape of at least 6 women. A year previous, Commissioner Giggins said it's a bit shocking that after the independent audit of CRDF they didn't pass anything, and that the jail system is going slower than anybody wants, but we just have to keep up with the pressure. So how about now in 2020? Have the appropriate changes been made? CRDF needs to be closed and treat those people in the community. It's interesting to note the discrepancy in reporting of in-custody deaths of the sheriff versus the OIG. Sheriff's Department manipulating the death toll to appear lower. 55 deaths last year, 45 the year before. If you take out the 9 COVID deaths, we're still seeing record levels of in-custody deaths, higher than every year going back to last 2013 under former Sheriff Baca. So you can't blame COVID. And 9 people wouldn't have died of COVID if sheriff deputies didn't refuse to get vaccinated, wear PPE, or follow guidelines. The OIG reporting that incarcerated folks who died of COVID were denied vaccination themselves is disgusting. As for the fentanyl excuse, where is that coming from? Deputies are bringing it in. What if those experiencing addiction issues were receiving treatment in a facility that provided compassionate care from trained professionals? Jails are not it. Over 6,400 in mental health programs. LA County jails are not a mental health care system. Why do we continue to treat them as such? The solution is not more jobs in county jails. The real answer is treatment in actual mental health facilities and community-based treatment programs. Ms. Belt said our carceral system was designed this way.
And that does conclude your time. Next, we will hear from Julie Martinez. Julie, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We do, yes.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to address the board. First, I'd like to uplift all of the families whose loved ones have been killed by deputy sheriffs operating out of the LA County Jail. Unfortunately, I'm going to focus a lot on the budgetary concerns that were brought up by Commissioner Kennedy. We in the community have been following Sheriff Villanueva's out of control spending. We noticed that he manipulates the narrative and pretends, and well, I'm just going to say lies, and claims that the defund movement is destroying his ability to hire more deputies throughout the county, including the jails. And that's just a false narrative. He utilizes his PR division for his campaign, which is, I believe, is illegal. And for those of us who are in the community and actually see the deployment of sheriff deputies, sometimes they are cruising, they're laughing, they're dancing, they play music loudly, they park outside family members' homes for hours. When we confronted the watch commander, they have no knowledge of where these individual deputies are, they're lost. So I have no doubt that this is exactly the same manner of which Villanueva is running the jails, and it's costing people's lives. Again, I want to uplift the Lovett family specifically. Their son was killed, and there definitely was a cover-up within the LA County jails. And as many people have noted, 55 deaths is a massive increase under Sheriff Villanueva. So the jails, he treats his jails as he does a community, with hatred and disdain, and it is transferred to the gang members who also, the deputy gang members who are also working in the jails. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Ernest Moore. Ernest, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say that I worked with Eddie Jones on the Thomas Horton III suspicious death. That was many years ago. We were trying to bring it out in the media. We found that, or most mainstream media stations did not want to cover that story fully. The number of deaths that you've just presented is totally unacceptable to me. While these people are under the sheriff's custody. This problem has been going on for far too long. The LA County Board of Supervisors are not able to handle this problem. This is an issue where the citizens need to form and organize. And I have proposed this to them many times. I want to form a specialized law enforcement agency for Black Americans. We went through all this stuff with Black Lives Matter last year. They defunded the police. It's supposed to be helping Black people, but that's not helping Black people. We want the funds for the money that you took for defunding the police to form our own specialized law enforcement agency. We want to monitor. We want to go into Twin Towers and take complaints and monitor complaints from individuals that have been incarcerated in Twin Towers or complaints about any sheriff deputies within Los Angeles County. LA County Board of Supervisors cannot enforce the law.
Thank you. And that does conclude your time. Next, we will hear from Danny Espinoza. You're unmuted. Please go ahead, Danny.
Hi, can you hear me?
We do.
Hi, how are you? My name is Danny Espinoza, and I'm a resident of Santa Fe Springs, and I've been following this sheriff since he's been elected. I have a whole packet here with documents that I've documented. I've been attending these virtual meetings for years now, and what I want to know, and my concern is, I think this sheriff has earned himself to be charged criminally now. I understand the Attorney General initiated an investigation in January of 2021. I'm hoping they bring criminal charges, but what my understanding is that that's only going to be not a criminal investigation. It's going to be a pattern in practice where I doubt they're going to be criminal charges. I'm hoping, I'm optimistic, but I think this sheriff needs to be criminally charged. Like I said, I have a bunch of documents where I've heard doctors by the name of Janice Hanna. She testified here a while back to the COC, and she testified that the deputies in the hospitals were intimidating the doctors to violate civil rights of the patients. So we have it all, ladies and gentlemen, and I think Alex Villanueva needs to be criminally charged. And I am the people, I am part of the community, and I've seen him, and I have videos. I've seen Laura Shark. There's my virtual friends, Laura Shark, Tom Zebra, they have videos where deputies are violating civil rights. The mayor of Compton, I believe it was Asia Brown, the deputy searched her vehicle unlawfully, violated her civil rights, and Alex Villanueva said that there was not a lot there. He needs to be criminally charged. I'm telling you, I know what I'm talking about. I've been following this for years. I've been studying this guy. He needs to be criminally charged. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Danny. And next we will hear from Michelle Infante, and we'll try to go back to AJ White. If you would like to make a public comment and you have not heard your name be called yet, please raise your hand in the participant window or send a chat to the host. So Michelle, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So Sergio Alomar came on and talked about drugs being inside the jails, but what he didn't talk about is that the deputies inside that are bringing the drugs into the jails. He forgot about that part, which was convenient for him. We don't want to talk about the sheriffs who are bringing in the drugs, who are causing these overdoses. We didn't hear anything about that. You know, the sheriff's department cannot, if their life depended on it, write a complete, transparent investigation report. If the commission would pick up just 5 and read them, what you would find is vagueness, ambiguity, lack of clarity, people with no names. These are not reports or investigation reports that are accountable and transparent. They're full of character assassination, blaming other people. We had COVID deaths. But these deaths were inside your jails, whether COVID was there or not. You have a responsibility to the people that you are caring for. You cannot let them die. We have deputies who are telling stories, setting up scenes, taking hours and hours to have the county coroner come in, trampling on evidence, hauling people out from inside the cell, changing the scenes, and then creating false narratives that are perpetuated by the county coroner who come in and fill in the blanks for them. You need to take a good look at everything. The OIG's office shouldn't be on here giving props for anything that the sheriff's department does, because everything that they do is not transparent. It's not accountable to the people in the community or the commissions, and deaths keep continuously happening. And suicides, we don't know if these suicides are by these people of their own mind. They could have been driven to that by the sheriff's
time. And we will try AJ White. AJ, we're hearing a lot of background. Okay, AJ, we have you muted. It seems like you're hearing it through another speaker, so please turn that off. We will try to come back to you. Dana Bolt, you are unmuted. Please go ahead with your comment.
Hear me?
Dana, we do hear you now. Yes, please go ahead.
Dana, we do hear you now. Yes, please go ahead. We do hear you now.
It does sound like we have background.
It does sound like we do hear you now. It does sound like we do hear you now.
It looks like Dana and AJ that you may have a secondary source of audio that's playing the speaker. Please turn that off and I will try unmuting you each again. That will be the remainder of all of the public comments. So AJ, I'm unmuting you now. Please go ahead with your comment, AJ. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good. Sorry, I have my headphones on too. A little reverb. This is all with all due respect to checks and balances and the bureaucracy that we have to deal with. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking CLC OIG for getting the subpoena power in order and pro bono. I'm here to turn pro bono. I was having a hard time regarding low income situations. I was in jail about 5 years ago. I think Miss Giggins, said about 5 years ago they got this going, and I think I was in custody 2017, 2018, experienced a lot of harassment, problems with dispositions. I was fighting a GBI and an officer, and they have access to all my mail. They're on the security walks talking about it constantly, but I can't work for them. Okay, so I can't get any extra cash or whatever, food, to keep myself calm and able to fight my case. But they can read all my mail and tell everybody what I'm right or whatever. So it's ridiculous. There's some sort of, I don't know what that quagmire is, but it needs to be kind of looked at. But thank you for the getting I was trying to learn how to use personal jurisdiction because I moved to San Francisco in order to continue this claim that I put in with the OIG and the CLC. So once again, pro bono, full subpoena power. So I was having problems getting that personal jurisdiction taken care of. To get from distance, lo and behold, everything's starting to come through. So yeah, mail checks, security walks, harassment, a worker program for people fighting cases against the officers, against the sheriff's department. That's basically all I have to say. And I'll just close with that.
Thank you, AJ. And Dana, we are going to unmute you again now. If you do have any additional speaker, please make sure that that is turned off. You are unmuted. Dana, please go ahead.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear me now?
We do, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Dana Garcetti Bolt from the Office of the Public Defender, and I wanted to thank Commissioner Rubin for raising the issue of death notifications to attorneys of record. In our office, we do occasionally have it is some of our clients who die in custody, and it is only when we make appearances in court or at a jail facility that we discover that our clients are dead. We've been asking for notification from the Sheriff's Department for several months now and have not yet received that cooperation. I don't think it's an unwillingness. I think it's just we're down on the list of priorities. So I would like to ask OIG perhaps to, during a death review, remind the Sheriff's Department that the attorneys of record need to know if their client has died. Thank you.
Thank you. And that does conclude all of the individuals who signed up for public comment on the jails item.
Thank you. I think the only item left on the agenda is if there are any additional general public comments.
Yes, and we do have a couple of hands raised. I'm not sure if it's people who wanted to make general public comment or if they're just raised from before. So as another announcement, if you have called in, please press *3 to get in queue. If you're logged into the WebEx and would like to make general public comment, please raise your hand in the participant window. We'll take a quick announcement in Spanish before we take Julie Martinez. So please go ahead with the Spanish announcement.
Buenas tardes. Si necesita traducción a sus comentarios, simplemente diga la palabra español antes de empezar y alguien le dará instrucciones de cómo proceder. Gracias.
Thank you. And we do have a couple of individuals signed up for public comment. Julie Martinez, please go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity yet again to address the commission, and thank you for all the work that you are doing. It is appreciated. I am an impacted family. My grandson was killed by a sheriff deputy from the East LA Banditos in 2019. And I am going to bring up another issue that I touched on, and that is the budget of Sheriff Villanueva. As I stated, those of us who are in the community see a tremendous amount of wasteful spending, wasteful in the way that he deploys his deputy sheriffs. They're, like I said, they cruise the neighborhood, they laugh, they joke, they park their cars and for hours. And when we have commented or called in to the watch commander, we're told that they're just passing through and they're having lunch in their car. We just see a tremendous amount of waste. This is the largest sheriff budget in the nation, quite possibly the world. And it is a wasteful budget. There's a lot of overtime. He provides a lot of overtime for his command staff and people who are in favor with him, and it's very, very wasteful on the backs of working class folks in LA County, and we're really sick and tired of the budgeting process. So when a representative like today complain about the inability to fully staff the LA County jail due to budgeting crisis, it's mismanagement of money, and it is considered a cash cow for many sheriffs. They have disdain for the community, and yet they're paid very well. Sheriff Villanueva treats his position as though he's an ambassador. If you've ever attended any event that he is, it is overrun and over-policed with multiple cars, and it creates a very dangerous position for those of us in the community to have so many sheriff deputies that are armed and treat the community with disdain. I hope that you do not accept the sheriff's explanation. Thank you.
Ernest Moore, you are unmuted. Please go ahead, Ernest.
I already did a comment before.
Sure. Did you want to provide a general public comment now?
Oh, yes, general public comments.
Please go ahead.
I wanted to say that it is obvious that there is illegal discrimination employment within the Sheriff's Department. There's a bias for Hispanic police officers, many of whom are racist against Black Americans. There should be some, or there needs to be some enforcement on employment laws to hire more Black American sheriff deputies, non-Uncle Toms, to be sheriff deputies. And actually, there should be some initiative from the Board of Supervisors to increase the Black American population. Our population is getting wiped out by immigration, specifically from Hispanics. The defunding the police, again, I have proposed to them several times about funding my law enforcement agency, LA BAM, for Black American officers. In fact, I think it's best if, since the sheriff's department is like 90% Hispanic, we should have our own sheriff's department or section from the sheriff departments that's all Black Americans. Something has to be addressed about this illegal discrimination in employment, which is pervasive throughout all of LA County. I used to work for LA County. They're giving preferential treatment to foreigners over Black Americans, even white Americans for that matter. And that's illegal. And that has to stop. And I'm also against throwing ice out of Twin Towers. I don't see why the sheriff would see that that's an
Ernest, that
accomplishment.
does conclude your time. Thank you. And Michelle Infante, you are unmuted. Please go ahead with your comment.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think it would be a good idea if the civilian oversight took the responsibility to monthly inform the community of how many deaths have occurred inside the jails, because what happens is they get swept under the rug, community doesn't hear about it, and then they end up voting for someone who can't handle the responsibility of being the sheriff. So I think that the civilian oversight should consider informing the community on a monthly basis what deaths have happened, whether they're in custody or whether they're shooting, and what's happening with those, to keep the community informed about what's going on, because they only hear from the rest of us and families that already know what's happening. I think it's important for you to state that you've investigated a few, or the deaths that happen on a monthly basis, because 12 deaths starting from January until March of this year. I mean, there's no word to even describe what that sounds like or what that looks like. It would be informative to the families and to the community, because sometimes what happens is we have someone who's been determined to be suicide, like Helen Jones's son, and then it turns out that they write it's undetermined. But what happens is the statistic goes out into the community and everyone believes that someone has committed suicide, when that's the furthest thing from the truth. So you should take the initiative, and on a monthly basis, you should be discussing the deaths that are happening inside, because that's part of what's happening every day within the county. So it's important for you to take the responsibility of letting the community know at our civilian oversight meetings that these deaths are happening. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from MJ King. Please go ahead, MJ.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the OIG for going weekly into the system to acknowledge and report everything that Ms. Beltz has reported on is constant neglect and misconduct on behalf of the Sheriff's Department. The most effective way to respond to people dying in jails is to drastically reduce the number of people in custody. Medical crises, drug overdose, suicide, all can be directly attributed to overcrowding in jails. As Ms. Beltz said, our carceral system was designed this way, and all of which can and should be treated through alternatives to incarceration in our community. Chief Aloma might tell himself that Men's Central has worn out its usefulness, but it hasn't. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. Please, please pay more attention to those deaths noted as suicide, and let's see the root cause of them. Who is bringing the fentanyl in? Who is, as you reported, standing to the side, not even giving folks attention when they are in crises, in need? Let's get people the resources and the services they need. Let's fund that. LASD is killing people. Please continue to report on this, and please hold the Sheriff's Department accountable. Please support a charter amendment to hold Alex Villanueva and his department accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Danny Espinoza. Please go ahead, Danny.
This is general comment. Again, I've been following this sheriff for years, and what sticks to my mind is when there was a doctor that testified a while back. Her name was Hannah Janeway. And what sticks to my mind is when Dr. Janeway was talking about deputies in the hospitals were violating civil rights on a regulars, they were prevailing from the doctors. They were taking blood from patients without warrants. That just stuck in my head. And I remember the chair, Mr. Chair here, Sean Hannity, he said, well, who prevails? And she testified that the sheriffs do. Now, there's something definitely wrong here, guys. There's a pattern with this guy, Alex Villanueva. Like I said, he needs to be criminally charged. We're only we're only talking about the things we know of, the things that come shed to light. I can only imagine all the things we don't know of are still buried under the dirt. And I could only imagine, because there's just so much there that I know for a fact that he needs to be criminally charged. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last person who signed up for public comment is Andres Kwan. You're unmuted, Andres. Please go ahead.
Commissioners, this is Andres Kwan, ACLU. We have repeatedly, alongside a broad community coalition, have urged the COC to ask the board to move to amend the county charter to maximize civilian oversight and create a system of checks and balances. I'm going to read to you excerpts from an op-ed by Miriam Krinsky, the former head of the ED of the CCJV, and Dean Erwin Chemerinsky of the UC Berkeley School of Law. It was published in the LA Times last Friday, and I'll quote: "Creating meaningful checks and balances for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office is long overdue. No official should have the unchecked power that is claimed by the sheriff. The way to fix this broken system is to amend the county charter. Villanueva's actions show that the county government structure is inadequate to counter a sheriff who is openly hostile to oversight. The board, responsible for the health and safety of the public, needs greater mechanisms to rein in any sheriff who abuses power, whether this sheriff or whoever comes next. It is long past time to amend the county charter to provide that authority. Any reform should, at a minimum, create a process to allow removal of the sheriff for serious misconduct by a supermajority vote of the board, reinforce the board's ability to guide policymaking in the sheriff's department, and establish permanent independent civilian oversight. To make this reality, the board must act promptly to place a proposed charter amendment on the ballot. To get this issue before the voters in the November election, the process must be completed by early August. If the amendment is approved by voters, it is possible that the sheriff or law enforcement unions may challenge it, especially the provisions allowing for removal of the sheriff by the board. But this authority is appropriate and in line with the text of the California Constitution, state statutes, and case law. Sheriffs have great power, and a sheriff abuses it has the potential to do tremendous harm. Neither elections every 4 years nor the theoretical possibility of an expensive recall vote can produce timely accountability and correction when the power of the sheriff's office is abused. For many reasons, including the limited
And that does
transparency.
conclude your time,
you can read it.
Andres. And Chair Kennedy, that does conclude all of the public comment for general public comment.
Thank you. I think it's time to conclude this meeting. We are going to take up the issue of deputy gangs and many other issues at our next meeting, Thursday, May 19th, 2022. And you can follow us at our website at coc.lacounty.gov. I appreciate all of the speakers who came and talked today before us. Katie Belts, your accounts of what's happening in the jail are absolutely heartbreaking. I think you have inspired all of the commissioners to do more to try to solve this problem. And I will see all of you next month on May 19th. Thank you very much.